Hello, welcome everyone. This is Riftbound 101, a comprehensive guide on how to get started playing Riftbound. We're starting from the scratch up, so it's great for beginners, but there's also a bunch of advanced things that I included right here, which may be good for other veterans as well. All these things from this presentation are adapted from the core rules published by Riot version 1.0. So let's get started. What is Riftbound? Riftbound is a TCG. You've probably heard of other TCGs such as Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh!, but Riftbound is unique in the sense that it's a game more about scoring battlefields rather than depleting your opponent's life points. It takes around 20 minutes to complete, and it has a variety of game modes, 1v1, 2v2, and free-for-all. We're mainly going to be focusing on 1v1 in this presentation. There is a disclaimer, though, that this video was created before the actual launch of Riftbound in both China and the English audience, so there might be changes that are made upon the actual launch of the game itself. Let's get started. So here is our setup right here. It does look a bit crowded, however, we'll go over all of this slowly, step by step. So right here we have our legend slot. There's only one legend per deck. So what is a legend? A legend is basically these cards right here that have the legend symbol right next to it. And it has a color identity, which basically determines what cards can go into your deck. So for example, Jinx is red and purple, Ahri here is green and blue, Teemo blue-purple, Lee Sin green-orange, and Leona green and yellow. And these domains, color identities, kind of dictate what the playstyle of your deck will be like and how you would actually build your deck. Next, we have our legend effect. Each legend has its unique legend effect, and that also kind of determines what playstyle your deck will be like. Moving on, we have our chosen champion. Our chosen champion is basically a champion unit that matches the legend name that we have. So for example, if we have our legend Jinx, our chosen champion must be a champion unit that has also the name Jinx. There might be multiple champion units that have the same name, but a different subclass. So we have a Jinx Rebel right here, and we have a Jinx Demolitionist right here. When we put one of these cards into our chosen champion zone, it's basically a card that we can play whenever we want when we have the resources to. If we want to play both of these champion units in our deck, we can only choose one to put in our chosen champion slot, but the other one can be put in our main deck where we might be able to draw and maybe use it. The advantage of putting it in our chosen champion slot is that we always have access to it when we want to. We don't need to rely on actually trying to draw it out. Another example right here, there's two different Jinxes. There's also two different champion Ahris right here as well. Next, we'll move on to our rune deck, and it's basically going to be talking about some runes, which is how we generate resources in this game. So rune deck is made out of a white backing, and it consists of 12 runes that have the same color as your champion legend. So for example, if we have a Jinx legend right here that is red or purple, we can only use the red and purple runes. We cannot use a different colored rune, so we can't use something like a green rune, for example. You generate 2 additional runes per turn, and we'll get into that a bit more later. And the rune split can be any type of split. So for example, Jinx, which uses red and purple runes, can be a 6 red, 6 purple split, summing to 12, a 9 red, 3 purple split, also summing to 12, or just 12 red in general, or playing just the mono red deck. Again, runes are things that are used to generate resources, which are used to pay for the associated costs of cards. So looking at costs now, for right here we have a Jinx Rebel champion unit, or a unit right here. On the top left we have the number 5 right here, and that is its energy cost. On the bottom right here, that is its power cost. Some units may not have a power cost, take a note. So how is energy generated? Energy is generated by exhausting a rune, and exhausting in this case means tapping it and turning it 90 degrees sideways. Energy is not color dependent, so that means I can use purple or red runes to pay for my Jinx Rebel. Even though Jinx Rebel is purple, I can also use red runes to pay for it. So for example right here, by tapping this rune, I generate 1 energy. Let's take a look at power. Power is generated by recycling a rune, and you can recycle both an active or exhausted rune. So an active rune would be standing up like such, and an exhausted one would be it sideways. Power is color dependent, so right here it requires a purple power right here, so I cannot recycle a red rune to generate a power cost to pay for this Jinx Rebel. What does recycling actually mean? Recycling means that we're going to be putting that card back to the bottom of our rune deck. So for right here in this animation right here, I'm flipping my purple rune upside down, and I'm lifting up my rune deck right here and shoving it on the bottom, our rune deck. And we'll have 11 right here. Previously we had 10. So let's go with an example of how to actually pay for this Jinx Rebel card. So it costs 5 energy and 1 purple chaos power. So first what we need to do is we need to tap 5 runes because it costs 5 energy. Tapping 5 runes will generate us 5 energy. The additional cost we need to pay is a purple power, so we need to recycle that. So we can recycle both an exhausted or an active rune. So we can use 1 rune for just making energy, and then we can recycle it to generate our power as well. We can shove that purple rune to the bottom of our rune deck right here, and we generate a purple power, and now I have the resources to pay for my purple Jinx right here. So let's go over some more examples to make this idea a bit more clear. So right here we have a cemetery attendant, this little doggy, and we want to play him. So he costs 3 energy and 1 purple power. So we need to tap 3 runes right here, and we also need to recycle a purple rune. In this animation, anything that becomes transparent will signify it being recycled. Another example right here, to pay this Watchful Sentry. Right here, he only costs 2 energy, he doesn't cost any power, so we just need to tap 2 runes. Right here is a Rebuke spell. It costs 2 energy and 2 purple power right here. So we need to tap 2. Ideally, we want to tap the ones that we're also going to recycle later. And we're going to recycle these 2 purples as well. Lastly, we have this other spell right here, Guerrilla Warfare. Costs 2 energy, and it has this blue and purple split as its power cost. So this means it can be either paid by a purple power or a blue power. So for example, right here, we tap 2 to pay for that 2 energy cost, and we recycle a purple to pay for its power cost. Or we can instead just tap 2 right here and recycle a blue to pay for its power cost right here. Hope that makes a lot more sense. In Riftbound, there is also a mechanic called floating resources, so I'll walk you through that. So right here, I want to play both a Rebuke spell, which costs 2 energy and 2 purple power, as well as a Watchful Sentry. I don't have to do them one by one, I can do them in a different order as well. So for example, I can first tap all 4 of my runes right here. So that generates me 4 energy. I don't have to do it 2 and 2, I can just tap it all 4 at once. And then I can recycle 2 of my purple runes and then use 2 of my floated energy because I tap 4. I can use 2 out of the 4 to pay and play my Rebuke alongside with the recycled purple power. Next, I can then use the remaining 2 floated energy that I tapped earlier in step 1 to just pay for that Watchful Sentry right here. Let's go for another example right here. So right here, I want to play a Seal of Insight, which costs 0 energy and 1 blue power. And I also want to play a Watchful Sentry. So what I can do right here is to first tap 1 of my runes, and then I can recycle the blue rune to pay for my Seal of Insight. Because I tapped this rune earlier before recycling, I generated a energy floated. And I can use that energy to pay for something else. If, for example, I just recycled this blue rune without tapping it, that means I never actually generated this energy, and I basically lost an energy. Lastly, we can then use that 1 floated energy alongside tapping another energy to pay for my second Watchful Sentry right here. Again, if I didn't tap this blue rune before recycling it, I would also have to tap this purple rune right here to pay for my Watchful Sentry. Okay, moving on to the next thing. We have our main deck right now. So our main deck is made of this blue backing right here, and it contains 40 cards. One of these cards will be placed in your chosen champion slot, so you would choose one of them. So you choose one of the Jinxes to put in your chosen champion slot. So that means our total cards in our main deck will be 40 minus 1. So you'd actually have 39 cards in a pile of your main deck. So the main deck consists of a bunch of different cards. It consists of spells, gears, units, champion units, and we'll go over that later. You can also use other champion units that do not match your legend. So if my legend is Jinx right here, I can also include Darius champion unit in my main deck as well. Okay, moving on. We'll move on to our little trash pile. Basically our graveyard, so whenever units are killed, they enter our little trash pile, as well as whenever spells are used, they also enter our trash pile. Trash pile is fully visible, so if your opponent asks, they are able to scour through it, and you can also scour through it as well. So the next topic we'll be introducing is the hand. So the hand are basically cards that you draw and cards that are only visible to you and not to your opponent. And when we play units, or champion units from our hand, they are played to our base right here. So if I want to play this Traveling Merchant, for example, I would have to play it to my base from my hand. And units that are played from my hand come in exhausted because they have summoning sickness, and they can't move on the turn that they're summoned. So to signify that, we tap the card sideways. So any of our units that die for any reason, killed by a spell, killed in combat, will enter our trash pile right here. Gears, on the other hand, when played from hand, they also go into our base. Usually they can't move towards battlefields where units can, and they come into our base already readied, so they're not sideways. So that means they can be used on the turn they are played. Spells, on the other hand, when they're played from hand and paid for their cost, even if they resolve or do not resolve, they will enter the trash after they are played. There are also some cards that have discarding effects, and any discarded cards will enter the trash pile. So Chemtech Enforcer right here says, when you play me, discard 1. So if I'm to play Chemtech Enforcer to base, I will have to discard Traveling Merchant. So I play it to base, and because it's a unit, it will come in exhausted. And in response for playing the Chemtech Enforcer, a Traveling Merchant will enter trash. Next, we'll move on to the battlefields. So battlefields are basically locations where you try to contest against your opponents in order to score points. And each battlefield has some unique effects that change the way how you approach the game. So in a 1v1 game, there will be 2 battlefields that are in play, and in a 2v2 game or a free-for-all game, there will be 3 battlefields in play simultaneously. Battlefields are marked by this battlefield icon right here on the card. Don't worry about the effects too much if you don't really understand them right now. For when we go through the presentation, you should be able to understand what these effects mean. Moving forward, we'll have some movement. Active units may issue standard movement. A unit is active if it is not exhausted or tapped. So our Chemtech Enforcer is vertical, so it's active, where our little doggy, our Cemetery Attendant, is sideways, so it's not active. And as a cost to move, our active unit is exhausted or tapped. If we want to move our Chemtech Enforcer to Battlefield A, we can move him, but we also need to exhaust him. From this animation right here, we can also see that we can move from battlefield back to base, as long as our unit in the battlefield was previously in an active state. Normally, units cannot move from battlefield to battlefield, so normally a unit cannot move from battlefield B to battlefield A unless they had a special keyword, and that keyword is Ganking. So Vi has the keyword of Ganking, so it's able to move from battlefield B to battlefield A. Otherwise, if it doesn't have a keyword, or unless it's otherwise stated, it normally cannot, unit cannot move from battlefield to battlefield. You can also move multiple units through standard movement simultaneously. So if I want to move all my units to battlefield A to maybe attack or contest something, I can move all of them at once. So in this animation shown right here, our Legion Rearguard and our Cemetery Attendant move from base to battlefield A, and our Vi move from battlefield B to battlefield A. But note, when you're moving multiple units, they need to have the same final destination. So you can't have Legion Rearguard move to battlefield A, simultaneously Cemetery Attendant moving to battlefield B. Alright, let's see what's next. We have our point system next. So our point system right here is basically how we win the game. So in a standard 1v1 or a free-for-all game, it goes up to 8 points. In a 2v2 game, it goes up to 11. And whoever reaches the point total first will win the game. Again, there are exceptions. There is this battlefield right here called Aspirant's Climb, which increases the points needed to win the game by 1. So in 1v1, it would be 9 points, and 2v2 would be 12. And then there's also other ways to win the game. There's this battlefield right here called Grand Plaza. It says when you hold here, if you have 7+ units here, you win the game. It's actually pretty hard to achieve. But mainly you'll be winning through scoring points. And you can score points by mainly conquering or holding battlefields, which we will discuss later. But there are also other means right here by other cards, such as Yasuo. When he moves 3 times in a single turn, you get a point. And Tryndamere right here, when he assigns excess damage, you also score a point from a Conqueror. The last point is harder to score, and we'll talk about this more later. So scoring points from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 have the same rules. There's less restrictions, but scoring the 8th point has a few restrictions. So how do we score points? So we have conquering. So what does conquering mean? Conquering means that we successfully enter a battlefield without being killed, and by spells, effects, or enemy units. So if my Legion Rearguard moves to Zon Wardens this battlefield and it doesn't get nuked by a spell, then I successfully conquer Zon Wardens, and I will get a point right here. If I move my Cemetery Attendant right here to Battlefield A, which also has an enemy unit right here, we will start a showdown, a combat showdown. If I win this showdown right here, I will also conquer this battlefield. So if my Cemetery Attendant is able to kill their unit, then I will also gain a point. So another way to score a point is through holding. Holding means that you successfully enter a battlefield, your opponent does nothing on their turn to remove that unit, and at the start of your next turn, you will immediately get a point at your beginning phase. So for example, right here, we have our Legion Rearguard. He moves to Battlefield B, right here, and he gets a point for conquering Battlefield B. Our opponent does nothing on their turn, really. They move a unit to Battlefield A and conquer it, but they don't move any units to Battlefield B to try and contest my Legion Rearguard, nor do they play any spells to try and remove it. Hence, on the start of my next turn right here, I will have held Battlefield B and gained a point. There are also other rules stating that once you have conquered or held a battlefield, you cannot reconquer or rehold it. So for example, right here, my Legion Rearguard moves to Battlefield B, I get a point for conquering it. However, if I move my Noxus Hopeful here again, on the same turn I move Legion Rearguard, I will not be getting another point for conquering. Another example right here, I own this very strong Volibear right here on Battlefield A, and on this battlefield it says right here, when you hold here, play a 1 might recruit unit token in your base exhausted. So I've held this battlefield right here, I gain a point, and I get a little recruit token that is exhausted right here. And I attempt to move Legion Rearguard on the same turn that I've held this battlefield onto Battlefield A. I've basically just moved Legion Rearguard, I am not reconquering Battlefield A, and I will not be getting my second point from moving Legion Rearguard right there. However, if I instead move Legion Rearguard to Battlefield B, and it does not get removed, I will be conquering Battlefield B instead. So the essential point right here is you can really only score 1 point per battlefield per turn, either by holding or by conquering. So now we're going to be talking about our final points. So we've gotten points up to 7 so far, and we just need our 8th point. A condition for the final point is that you cannot score your final point by a single conquer. So right here we have our Noxus Hopeful right here. He has 4 might, and I want to send him to this battlefield here, Battlefield A right here, in which I will win the trade. So I move him right here. We fight, and then the opponent unit dies. However, I do not get my 8th point. Normally, if this was not my 8th point, I would get a point for conquering. However, since this is me attempting to score my 8th point, which is the final point, I will instead draw a card instead. This card draw might potentially help me in securing my final point. To actually score the final point, you need to score by any other means rather than a single conquer. And that means you can score your final point by holding a battlefield. So if you're at 7 and you hold on your next turn, you can get to 8 right away. Or you can score on both battlefields on the same turn by means of both holding or conquering. So for example, right here, I've held this battlefield right here, I get my 7th point. And then I move a unit right here and conquer this other battlefield right here, giving me my 8th point, because I have scored both battlefields on the same turn, one from holding and one from conquering. There might be other scoring effects that also contribute to being able to help you score your 8th point. We've seen some of these before. Yasuo right here, if you move 3 times, score a point. And Ari, when I hold, you score 1 point. So basically, when Ari is holding, she scores 2 points for holding instead of 1. You can also gain your final point by being chosen from an opponent's burnout. So let's walk through what a burnout is. Burnout is basically when you attempt to interact with your main deck, but your main deck is empty. So if you're attempting to draw a card, or looking at or revealing cards from your main deck, putting cards from your main deck to trash, and you're unable to do so because your main deck is empty, then you will need to perform a burnout. To perform a burnout, you will need to shuffle your trash back into your main deck. So basically in this game, you'll never run out of cards, you'll just burn out. But normally you don't burn out unless you're a very cycle heavy deck. So right here, we'll shuffle our trash, sift that all into our little main deck right here. And then we will also have to choose an opponent to gain 1 point. So if you're in a 1v1, obviously there's only one choice, but free-for-all, there are additional choices. And then after you shuffle your cards in your main deck, you're then able to perform the action that you previously could not have done, such as drawing a card right here. So now we'll go over some combat basics. So right here on the top right corner, we have our might value. And a unit's might is kind of equal to its attacking power as well as its health. So pretend we have a unit on a battlefield right here. For simplicity's sake, I will use this little icon to symbolize a battlefield to make things less cluttered. So you are in control of a battlefield if you have successfully conquered it or held it, and you maintain control of the battlefield that is being contested by an enemy unit. So right here, we have our little Clockwork Keeper enemy unit that is attacking our battlefield right here. In this case, the attacker is the Clockwork Keeper, and the defender is us, this Noxus Hopeful right here. We still have control of this battlefield until the attacker takes over this battlefield, if it's able to. On the flip side right here, if the Clockwork Keeper was flat stuck into this battlefield right here, and we attempt to attack it, then now we're the attacker, and the defender is the Clockwork Keeper. This attacker and defender thing is quite relevant in this game because there are effects that reference attacking and defending. Okay, next, assigning combat damage. So right here, our enemy Clockwork Keeper has 2 might, and essentially it has 2 attack and 2 health. Opposingly, our unit right here, our Noxus Hopeful, has 4 might, 4 attack, 4 health-ish. So our Noxus Hopeful is able to swing and assign 4 combat damage to the opposing Clockwork Keeper, while in return, the Clockwork Keeper is only able to assign 2 damage because it only has 2 might to us. So when we resolve that combat damage right here, because the damage on Clockwork Keeper, that 4 damage that was on Clockwork Keeper, equals or exceeds its might of 2, 4 is bigger than 2, it is killed from combat damage, while we'll receive 2 damage right here. So basically our health decreases to 2. At the end of a combat, or at the end of a player's turn, we heal back to our full might value. So that 2 damage that Clockwork Keeper did to us is now healed back to 4, which is equal to our might right here. So a tip for this game is if you know that you're unable to win a trade, there is no point of actually sending that unit there, because any damage that it deals, it will be removed at the end of combat or at the end of a player's turn. So right here, because I was attacking that Clockwork Keeper, they were defending, and my Noxus Hopeful has successfully survived combat, we will gain a point for conquering, because our Noxus Hopeful went in, it survived combat, and it is now in control of this battlefield right here. Here is another example right here for splitting damage. Right now, we are attacking, they are defending. Since we moved into the battlefield, they were on the battlefield before we moved in. My unit right here has 2 mights, and they have a Cytheria right here that has 1 might, and a Clockwork Keeper that has 2 might. However, this card right here, it says Assault 2. +2, this symbol is for might right here. It says +2 might while I'm an attacker. So because I am attacking, I will get this +2 might. So in total, I have 4 might, which means that I essentially have 4 attack and 4 health. So I can now split that combat damage. They don't have a choice because I only have 1 unit here, so they'll assign 2 damage here and 1 damage to my Chemtech Enforcer, so my health will drop back down to 1. However, I have a choice because there are 2 different units, and I will assign 2 damage to Clockwork Keeper and 2 damage to Cytheria Cloudfield, since I have 4 to assign. And they will perish because, again, the damage equals or exceeds the might value that they have. So again, the sum total might of your units may be split amongst enemy units assigned as combat damage. So if I had another unit on top of Chemtech Enforcer, I can also split their damage as well. So another rule about splitting damage is that you must assign lethal combat damage to a unit before assigning combat damage to another unit. In this example right here, we have our Noxus Hopeful as 4 might, and the 2 enemy units right here each have 3 might each. So I can assign 4 combat damage split between these 2 units right here. While they only have 1 choice, they'll assign 3 and 3 is 6 to me, like so. So I can't be assigning 2 combat damage to Eager Apprentice and then 2 combat damage to Dangerous Duo, because that is not assigning lethal damage to 1 unit first. So first I need to assign 3 combat damage to Eager Apprentice, and then I can assign my 1 remaining combat damage to Dangerous Duo, right? So Eager Apprentice will perish, as well as my Noxus Hopeful will be killed as well. But for this Dangerous Duo right here, although it had 1 combat damage assigned to it, it didn't die from it because its Might 3 is greater than 1, and hence will heal back to full after combat. So heal back to 3. Another example right here about reducing Might. So we have this card right here, Stupefy. It says give 1 unit -1 Might this turn to a minimum of 1 Might. So if the red player, the defending player, casts Stupefy on Noxus Hopeful, it will reduce Noxus Hopeful Might by 1. So if the Might is reduced, 4 minus 1 equals 3, its attack and health is essentially reduced as well. So since both units' mights are equal, they will trade with one another. So Eager Apprentice Might is 3, and effectively our Noxus Hopeful Might is now 3 for this turn. And when they combat each other, 3 damage here and 3 damage here, they will both perish. If we're attacking with Noxus Hopeful, because our Noxus Hopeful did not survive, we do not score a point for conquering. So important thing to note is that damage does not actually reduce might. For example, if this red player, the defender, casts this spell called Disintegrate right here, it says deal 3 to a unit at a battlefield. We're both at a battlefield, and it can target our Noxus Hopeful right here. So if that successfully resolves, then our health will be 4 minus 3, which equals 1 health right here. Take a note that our might is not reduced by this spell right here. This spell does not say it reduces might, it says it deals damage. So hence we still have 4 attacking power right here. And when combat begins, they will strike each other. I will deal 4 damage to Eager Apprentice, that will kill it. Eager Apprentice will do 3 damage to me. However, I lost 3 health from the Disintegrate spell, so I will also perish. And this is possible because units do not heal if they are not killed by a spell. Recall, units only heal after a showdown, whether that's a combat showdown or a non-combat showdown, or at the end of a player's turn. And in this case, both of them will trade. So another very important concept to understand in this game is called reinforcement. So you are in control again of a battlefield where you've successfully conquered or held it, and then you maintain control of that battlefield if it's being contested by an opponent. So if you have control of a battlefield, you may play units from your hand to battlefields which you control. So for example, I have this little card right here in my hand, this little Jinx card right here. Normally, I have to play this Jinx unit to my base, but because I've held control of this battlefield right here with Noxus Hopeful, I can instead play my Jinx onto this battlefield instead, rather than first playing it to base and then having to wait a turn for it to move onto the battlefield right here. And in this way, reinforcement helps you hold battlefields. A large part of this game is chains, and if you've ever played Legends of Runeterra, you can see sometimes a list of spells and abilities just stacking upon one another and then resolving. Riftbound kind of has a similar thing like this, but it is a bit different, so we'll go over this in quite a bit of depth. So the main thing to note is that triggers, abilities, and spells on a chain resolve from top to bottom, so if they are played last, they resolve first. So for example, right here, we have this little doggo right here, Cemetery Attendant, that I control, and my opponent right here casts a Disintegrate onto my little doggo. Pretend this doggo was on a battlefield. This says deal 3 to the battlefield. If this kills it, draw 1. However, I want to save my little doggo, so I will cast a spell called Discipline right here. It says give a unit +2 might this turn, draw 1 card. This Discipline right here is on the top of the stack, followed by Disintegrate. So Discipline is on top of Disintegrate, so Discipline will resolve first. Play order is Disintegrate and then Discipline, but the resolution order is opposite of it. So it's Discipline and then Disintegrate. So first, my Discipline will resolve. I will gain 2 might to my little doggo right here, so he'll have 5 might in total. And then Disintegrate resolves. So Disintegrate will deal 3 damage to my little doggo right here. So 5 minus 3 equals 2. So my little doggo survives. And that also denies the draw from the opponent because they are unable to kill my doggo with the spell. So you can see how spells and chains are really useful in this game for getting an advantage over your opponent. So let's move on to a more complex example. So right here, red player is sending their first mate to attack my defender, my Eager Apprentice right here on a battlefield. They have a Sona with 4 might in their base right here. because they sent an attacker in, it starts a combat showdown. And next, because they are their attacker, they have priority, so they cast the spell Challenge right here. It says choose a friendly unit and an enemy unit. They deal damage equal to their mights to one another. So they choose a Sona and my Eager Apprentice right here. So if they do strike, my Eager Apprentice will die because it has 3 might compared to the opponent's 4, where my opponent's Sona will survive on 1 HP. And hence, because they want this to resolve like this way, they'll pass priority and hopefully wanting me to pass so it can actually resolve. Once they pass priority to me, I don't want my Eager Apprentice to die. So I will decide to play 2 reaction spells on top of that. So I play 2 Stupefies, one on top of another. So when I have priority on my turn, I can play as much as I want before passing to the opponent. So right here, Stupefy says, again, give a unit -1 might this turn to a minimum of 1 might, draw 1. So I target both of these to the Sona right here. It resolves like such right now, then Sona will be at 2 might before she attempts this challenge right here, which basically it means she'll lose the challenge because she'll be at 2, well, I'll be still at 3. And because I want it to resolve this way, I will pass priority back to red player. So red player really doesn't want this to happen. They want their Sona to live. They react with this spell called Defy right here. Defy says, counter a spell that costs no more than 4 energy and no more than 1 power. So because Stupefy only costs 1 energy and costs 0 power, it is able to negate one of the Stupefies. The red opponent is able to choose which Stupefy they want to negate. They don't have to negate the most recent one. They can negate the one that is below it, like this one right here. And the red player now passes to me. So I really don't want this to happen now. I want my Eager Apprentice to survive for whatever reason, and I will cast On Guard right here. So it says, give a friendly unit +1 might this turn, then an additional 1 might this turn if it is the only unit you control there. So I only have Eager Apprentice right here on this battlefield, so I will get +1 might and an additional +1. Essentially now my Eager Apprentice will be at 5 might when it starts resolving. Now I will pass the priority to play spells and other stuff to the red player right now. The red player doesn't have anything else to do. Maybe they ran out of cards in their hand, they don't have enough energy anymore, so they also pass. And when both players pass simultaneously, then the chain will start resolving. So starting first, we will resolve On Guard. On Guard resolves, giving my Eager Apprentice 2 might right here, so 3 + 2 = 5 might total. Next, the Defy resolves, and it negates one of the Stupefies on the stack right here. So eventually just disappears from the little chain right here. Next, the other Stupefy that was not negated resolves, giving the Sona 3 might right here. And then finally, the challenge resolves, in which we will both strike one another. Sona does 3 damage to me, blue does 5 damage to the Sona right here. Sona perishes in response to the 5 damage being dealt. I have 2 health remaining because I have 5 might this turn. And then we will begin actual combat where attacker and defender fight each other. We'll assign damage again. I still do 5 damage to the first mate right here. But the first mate will also do another 3 damage to me right here. I'm at -6 where my might is 5. I will also perish. Moving on, if you were quite attentive of the previous 2 examples, the cards that were played on top of one another in the little chain were basically all reaction spells. However, there are different types of speed in Riftbound TCG as well. And starting off, we will introduce base speed. It's the slowest thing and doesn't have as many windows that it can be played compared to other types of cards of other speeds. So base speed cards can only be played on your turn, and it cannot be played amidst the chain. So it can't be played in reaction to something. It cannot be played in the middle of a showdown, either a combat showdown or a non-combat showdown. It cannot be played. And activating this base speed, spell, ability, or whatever will start a chain that can be reacted to. So some examples right here, Yasuo Legend ability, it says pay 2 mana, exhaust this legend, move a friendly unit to or from your base. If you don't understand all these terms so far, we will go over them a bit later. These are just some examples. We have Mobilize right here, so you can really only play Mobilize on your turn. It says channel 1 rune exhausted. Essentially, that means you just ramp 1 rune, but you can't play that on your opponent's turn, nor during some battle. Next, we have this card right here, Inverted Timelines. Each player discards their hand, then draws 4. You can only play this on your turn, can't be in the middle of a chain, so you can't be starting combat and then just slamming this card down and say, nope, you don't go get those cards that you saved up in your hand anymore. You can't do that. Same with Call of the Week right here. Each player kills one of their units. You can't just go into battle, slam this card down, and say, each of us, let's kill a unit. You can't do that. You can only do that during your turn and not in the middle of a chain. And playing all of these will start a chain that will allow other things the opponent can play to react. Moving on, we have the second fastest or second slowest speed. We have action speed. Action speed cards can only be played on your turn or during showdowns, and it's seen by this action symbol right here. If it doesn't have action or reaction, it's probably base speed. So we've heard of me talking about showdowns. We've heard of me talking about combat and non-combat showdowns. So what's the difference between these? Here, looking on this side right here, if my unit goes into this battlefield right here and there is an enemy unit fat on it right here, we will start a combat showdown because we will be combating. And during this combat showdown, I am able to cast action spells. Secondly, we have a non-combat showdown right here. So I am attempting to move to this battlefield right here, and I am attempting to conquer it to get a point. However, this opens a non-combat showdown because there's no enemy units present. Both me and my opponent is able to play action spells. So for example, if they have a spell that says deal 3 damage to a unit at a battlefield that is action speed, they are able to play it, and if it successfully resolves, my Legion Rearguard will not be able as conquering this battlefield right here. Similarly, in both of these showdowns, once these showdowns resolve, our units will heal back to full. Something that is not a showdown is just regular movement. For example, here, I already control this battlefield with my Jinx right here, and I moved in my Legion Rearguard to this battlefield right here. It does not start a showdown right here, so my opponent is unable to cast action spells onto it right here because it's not an actual showdown. And that is also the same with playing units from hand via reinforcement. So I played this Noxus Hopeful from hand to this battlefield right here. When I play it right here, there is no showdown being present, and hence there are no actions that either of us can be played until this play resolves. Afterwards, it'll be my turn, so I'll be able to play action spells, but my opponent won't be able to. Some examples of action speed cards. We have this Void Seeker right here, deal 4 to a unit at a battlefield, draw 1. So this is useful when an enemy is attempting to conquer a battlefield. You can nuke it out and deny the conquer point. We have Primal Strength right here, give a unit +7 might this turn. You can send like 1 unit to a showdown. You can suddenly just buff it with a big 7 might right here in an attempt to surprise your opponent. There's Rune Prison right here. You can potentially stun a unit when you're attempting to go in for a strike and you want to negate a big unit that is present on the board. Lastly, you have Rebuke. Also kind of does the same thing, returning a unit at a battlefield, either yours or your opponent's, to the owner's hand. Note that action spells can only be played to start a chain. So it cannot be used to react to spells or abilities or effects. So if there's something already starting the chain and there's something on the chain already, you can't play an action speed on top of it. For example, before we had that action speed challenge where an enemy unit is striking one of my units, I can't suddenly play Primal Strength on top of that to give my unit +7 might. That is invalid. Whenever we play an action speed, it starts a chain again, and it opens an opportunity for reactions to be played by both you and your opponent. And again, actions can only be played during your turn or during showdowns, combat or non-combat. Lastly, we have reaction speed, which means that it can be played on your turn during showdowns. In addition, it can also be played before another spell, effect, or ability resolves. So it can be added to a chain. So if there's a chain present, you can play reactions on top of that. Hence, example from before, all of those were basically reactions that were stacked on top of one another, and not actions or base speed. Some things to note is that abilities that add resources, such as energy or power, by like an opponent tapping a rune or recycling a rune, cannot be reacted to. There is no window to react to units actually being played, unless they have an ability that starts a chain, such as when I'm played, do XYZ, and then you're able to react to that. You cannot react to passive abilities, and you cannot react to movement as well, unless the movement is part of an ability. Playing a reaction speed card can either start a chain or add items to a chain. If your first card you play is a reaction, then it'll start a chain, and if you're playing a reaction speed card on top of a chain, then you're adding it to the chain. Some examples right here, we've previously seen this before. We have Stupefy, which gives a unit -1 might this turn. We have Windwall, which is basically a more expensive defy that doesn't have any limitations, it just says counter a spell, it's a reaction. We have Call to Glory right here, essentially it gives a unit +3 might this turn. And we have Gust right here, which basically returns a unit at a battlefield with 3 or less might to the owner's hand. One last thing to add is that any negation spells, when they negate some of the spell, it doesn't count as the spell being played. As you see these more and more, you'll get to know them more and more. It's okay if you don't really understand all of them right now. So hiding cards are kind of like trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can only hide cards in a battlefield that you control, and you cannot hide cards in your base. So right here, I control back alley bar because I have a Noxus Hopeful stuck to it. Right here, there's no units on here. It's an open battlefield. I do not control it, so I am unable to hide any cards right here. Nor, if there was an enemy unit right here, it's not an open battlefield right now anymore. It's controlled by an enemy unit, but I am still unable to hide a card on this battlefield right here. To hide a card, you'll be putting it face down onto a battlefield you control, like such. So from my hand, face down to a battlefield you control, and your opponent will not be able to see what card that is. Only you should know what that card is. Hiding a card does not count as playing the card, which will be relevant for other effects later. Hidden cards cannot be played on their turn, they are hidden. Right here it says kill a unit at a battlefield, its controller draws 2. So if I want to draw 2 on the turn I hide Hidden Blade, I cannot flip it immediately to cast it onto my Noxus Hopeful in order to draw 2. And hidden cards have the additional clause of affecting items here, where our Hidden Blade, even if I hit the previous turn, I cannot flip it over here and try to kill this Kiana right here because it is not here on this battlefield. Basically what it means, it says kill a unit at a battlefield here, its controller draws 2 here. Well, this here on the draw 2 is redundant. This kill a unit at a battlefield here means it can only kill a unit at a battlefield here. So I can activate it as a response to an enemy unit moving towards this battlefield trying to contest it, but I can't target another enemy unit at its base or at another battlefield. A card that is hidden is essentially now a reaction card. We just talked about reaction speed, so a card that is hidden is basically has reaction speed. And normally you're only able to hide 1 card per battlefield, unless there is this battle tree battlefield. You zoom in really closely, it says you may hide an additional card here, so you can hide 2 cards rather than the typical one. So how are we paying for our hidden card cost? So all hidden cards with the hidden keyword or term has the cost of 1 power, 1 rainbow power, which means it can be a power of any color. This is typically generated by recycling runes, but there are also other means. Revealing a hidden card also counts to that card being played as a reaction and hence will start or add to a chain. So since this is reaction speed, when it is hidden, on my next turn I can decide again to flip Hidden Blade to kill my Noxus Hopeful to draw 2 cards. Or if there's an enemy spell targeting my Noxus Hopeful for like 4 or 5 damage, trying to kill it at this battlefield right here, I can add the Hidden Blade to the chain by reacting to the spell being played by my opponent, and that will allow me to draw 2 cards by killing my unit, as it will already have died from the spell otherwise. Another thing to note is if I choose not to react with my Hidden Blade, it will fizzle out because I lost control of the battlefield. Whenever you lose control of your battlefield, your hidden cards will also fizzle out if you do not react with them. But most of the time, you can react. Again, reactions are played during your turn, showdowns, or before another spell effect or ability resolves. When you flip over your hidden card to react to something, or react as to just play it in general, you will no longer have to pay the additional costs associated with reacting with a hidden card. So normally the cost for playing Hidden Blade is 2 energy and 1 yellow power. However, if you want to bypass the restrictions of hidden, you can play it normally with the associated cost. So if I pay the 2 energy and that 1 yellow power from my hand, I can decide to Hidden Blade the enemy's Kiana right here, because it no longer has the restriction of a hidden card saying here. So it no longer says kill a unit at a battlefield here, it says kill a unit at his battlefield. It's normal text, so I'm able to just target Kiana, whereas if I hit it right here, I am unable to target Kiana again. So to do this, all I have to do is tap 2 runes right here to generate 2 energy, then recycle a yellow rune and target Kiana with my Hidden Blade to kill her, but my opponent will draw 2 cards. Moving on to some more hidden card examples, most of the time, hidden cards can be played as non-hidden as well. So for example, in this Fox Arrow right here, it can be hidden at a battlefield, or it can be a action spell right here, where it's played as turn or in showdowns. So if you want to play it as an action, you need to play 3 energy. As a hidden, it's just 1 power of any color. Right here we have Consult the Past. It says its ability is to draw 2. You can either hide it at a battlefield with just 1 power, or pay the 4 energy right here. So a disadvantage of using it as a hidden, it means that you can't use it on the turn that it's played. So although it's cheaper, 1 power compared to a more costly 4 energy, if you decide that you do need cards this turn now and here, you should probably just pay the 4 energy instead. In addition, there is a condition for hidden cards to be placed in a battlefield you control. So what if you don't control either of the battlefields? You won't be able to hide this card, so instead you will have to pay the 4 energy instead for it to draw 2. Hidden cards don't always have to be spells as well. They can also be units. And we have a Teemo right here. If you hide this at a battlefield and when you react to it, you flip it, that is when it counts as it being played. So that is when it gets that +3 might, not when you actually hide the Teemo itself. Next, we have a gear right here. So besides spells, units, hiddens can also be in gears. Gear right here is Zanya's Hourglass. Basically, all it says is that it'll save a unit on the battlefield that is hidden when it is reacted to. Just note that once a card is hidden, when it's in its hidden state, it loses all properties of its card that is in its face-up state. So if you hide a Teemo face down, it is no longer a unit, it's just a hidden card. And a hidden card is not a unit, it's not a spell, not a gear, until you actually reveal it. Let's talk about a bit more about spells. So there can be multiple different chains in a single turn. For example, we have this red player here, they play Snapvine, and Snapvine says, when you play me, choose an enemy unit at a battlefield, we'll deal damage equal to our mights to one another. The blue player has two different spells, one is an action and one's in reaction. When the Snapvine is played, it starts a chain, starts chain 1. And if the blue player wants to play Challenge, which is an action spell, they need to wait until the Snapvine ability resolves, because as we previously mentioned, action spells cannot be played in the middle of a chain, they can only start a chain. So what the blue player needs to do is he needs to wait for the Snapvine ability to resolve first, and since red's item, the Snapvine's ability, resolved last, blue gets priority now. And blue then plays Challenge and action spell starting chain 2, not a continuation of chain 1. And this continues in which both players are able to play reactions until both players pass, and then at that point the chain will start resolving from the item played last until all the way back to challenge. However, if the blue player decides they want to play a reaction spell such as Discipline instead, they can then add it towards chain 1 after Snapvine, so it'll continue chain 1 rather than starting a new chain. And what happens here is Discipline will first resolve, and then the Snapvine ability will resolve after. So again, once a spell or ability resolves, the next turn player gets priority to do something or pass, and if both players pass, then it fully resolves. So we'll move on to an example about resolving conditions. So basically in this game, when you pay for something such as spells, you do not have to perform the resolution effects until the spell actually resolves. So for example, we have this spell card right here, it's an action speed. It says discard 1, deal its energy cost as damage to a unit at a battlefield. So if we discard this card right here, it'll deal 10 damage as its energy cost is 10. And if we discard this card right here, it'll deal 5 damage as its energy cost 5. So what we first do is we pay 2 energy, plus we'll recycle a red rune to generate a red power to pay for this card right here. However, you do not need to discard a card yet until it resolves. So you say something like, I target Noxus Hopeful on this battlefield right here, does this spell resolve? And if they say yes, then you can just discard Darius right here. You just really need 5 damage here, you don't need to overkill it with 10. So you can just discard Darius once it resolves to then kill this Noxus Hopeful right here. However, if they do something in response, maybe play a reaction spell such as Discipline to give this Noxus Hopeful +2, and you really want this Noxus Hopeful dead for whatever reason, then instead of discarding Darius, you can then choose to discard this Volley Bear right here to deal 10 damage to kill the Noxus Hopeful, because 5 damage won't be able to kill the Noxus Hopeful when it's buffed. So we'll discard the Volley Bear right here, and we will wipe the Noxus Hopeful right there. Another example of this would be this card Bullet Time. It says action spell, it's a signature spell. It says pay any amount of any color of power to deal that much damage to all enemy units at a battlefield. So what you would do is you would pay for its cost, you'd pay 1 energy. So if it resolves and they don't really do anything, then you can decide to recycle however amount of runes to generate that power to deal that much damage to all the enemy units at a particular battlefield. A tip for using this card is that you can tap the runes before you recycle them to float some energy, and then after you pay the power from recycling the runes, you still have that floated energy you can use to play some units or some other spells or gears as you wish. So a bit more on timing. So in Riftbound right here, each player has a window to play reactions once an element on the chain resolves. So for example, you have a Teemo right here, he's 1 might, and you really want to save him for whatever reason. The opponent casts the spell Disintegrate right here. It says deal 3 to a unit at a battlefield. So as of right now, Disintegrate will kill this Teemo right here. We have this card Discipline in our hand. You can't really see the text, but it says give a unit +2 might. So even if we play it right here, we'll give +2 to Teemo, it'll go to 3. However, Disintegrate will still be able to kill it. But there is another condition of this Discipline right here. It also says draw 1. So we can first play our Discipline right here. and give our Teemo that +2 might once it resolves. And once it resolves, we also will draw a card. So once we draw a card right here, we see we have another reaction speed buffing spell that we can use on our Teemo. So before Disintegrate resolves, we have an opportunity to play the drawn card we got from Discipline right here. So right here, we can stack an On Guard onto our Teemo right here. It says give a friendly unit +1 might this turn, and an additional 1 might if it's the only unit you control there. Teemo is the only unit I control there, so I will give it another +1 and a +1. So in this case, then On Guard will resolve on the stack first before Disintegrate, and hence my Teemo will survive from the Disintegrate and also deny my opponent from getting a card draw. Disintegrate will finally resolve afterwards, right here, and my Teemo survives. Yippee. Okay, so we've gotten all the grueling rules and other basic core rules from the Riftbound game, and we're gonna finally start to learn how to actually start a game. So if you recall before, the setup will kind of look like this, but we'll start from the ground up, from when we actually find an opponent and try to set up our board. Okay. So I'll move this to the corner right here. So the setup first is we need to put our legend face down. So our legend will go down here like that. And then we also need to grab an appropriate champion from our main deck to put in our chosen champion slot. Remember, the chosen champion has to have the same name as your legend. And then afterwards, after we've taken the chosen champion out, face down, we will then shuffle our main deck, shuffle, and put that face down as well. We will also do the same with our rune deck. We'll shuffle our rune deck. We'll put it face down. Rune deck should have 12, our main deck should have 39. Next, both players will reveal their chosen champion and their legend as well. So reveal. Next, we will go to our battlefield deck right here. If it is a best of 1, battlefield will be randomly chosen from the battlefield deck. If it's a best of 3, then you will choose your battlefield right here, normally, instead of being at random. So you'll put the battlefield that you've chosen face down. Your opponent will also do the same. They'll put another battlefield face down. It's in red because it's from their opponent. Next, you'll both reveal the battlefields. So this is my battlefield that I revealed. This is the opponent's battlefield that they revealed. After that, we will determine a turn order by any means. So you can do a high roll with dice, you can do rock, paper, scissors, or whoever's birthday is closest to their current date gets to go first or second. Determine that. After the turn order is determined, you will draw 4 cards from your main deck. So it goes to 35 now. So 39 minus 4 is 35. And now you have a chance to mulligan cards. So mulliganing means to replace some cards in your starting hand. So any cards that aren't really great from starting out, you want to draw them later, you would try to mulligan them out. So in Riftbound, you can mulligan up to 2 cards from your hand, and the mulligan cards are recycled to the bottom of your main deck. So it goes down at the bottom, and your main deck is not shuffled afterwards. So unless you're a very heavy cycle deck, you will likely not see the 2 cards or 1 card you mulliganed if you do choose to mulligan. You do not need to show your opponent the cards you mulliganed. So right here in this hand right here, Jinx is a very heavy aggro deck. I really don't want this huge fat 9 drop in my hand at the beginning, so I'll probably decide to mulligan this. As you play more and more, you'll get more experience into what matchups to mulligan certain cards and what cards to keep. So to mulligan a card, I'll flip it upside down. I will then shove it down in the bottom of my main deck right here, and then put the cards back on top without shuffling my main deck. Goes to 36 right now because I mulligan 1. And then I will draw back the cards that I mulliganed. If I mulligan 1, I draw 1. If I mulligan 2, I draw 2. If I did not mulligan, I do not get a draw. So draw back 1. Got a super mega death rocket from that. Note that if you only mulligan once, you can't decide to mulligan again after you've seen the card that you've already drawn. Next, we'll move on to actually starting the game and phases of the turn. So for example, right here, we are going first. We will first awaken. So awaken phase, we'd ready our tap runes, units, and legends. Right now, since we're beginning right here, we don't have any runes, we have really nothing to awaken, so we'll just skip that right here. Next, we'll have beginning phase. It's resolve any start of turn abilities. And then afterwards, if we have any units controlling any of these battlefields right here, we would score a point from holding. There's also some interesting effects that interact with the beginning phase. So my Jinx legend right here says at the start of your beginning phase, draw 1 if you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand. So I still have 4 cards in my hand right now, so this doesn't apply right now. But maybe later in the future, if I have only 1 card or 0 cards in my hand, then I will get an extra card draw. Next is channel phase. So we would channel our top 2 runes from the rune deck. And all that means is we're grabbing the top 2 cards from our rune deck and we'll put it in our rune pile right here, and our runes will enter ready, so they'll be able to be used. Got a red rune and we got a purple rune. Next, we will go to our draw phase. We will draw a card from our main deck to our hand, and in this game there is no maximum hand size, so we'll draw a card right here. We got a Traveling Merchant, deck drops to 34. Now it's our action phase right here. So we can do any of these following below as many times as we want and as we are able to. So we can either play cards from our hand right here. We can use card abilities from both these cards right here when they're played, or we can use card abilities from runes. Remember, runes have the ability when they're tapped, they generate energy. When they're recycled, they generate power of their color. Or we can just decide to move units by exhausting them, completing a standard move. And again, if there are enemies on a battlefield and you move to them, it will start a combat showdown. So right here, I decide to tap 2. I will generate 2 energy right here and play this Legion Rearguard here. Remember, of Summoning Sickness, Legion Rearguard will come in tapped and cannot move to a battlefield. So basically, I've exhausted all my resources. I really have nothing else I can do, so I would pass my turn to the next player right here. Basically, at the end of our turn, all end of turn abilities occur. There's none right here. In addition, all units will heal back to their full might value as well. So what happens if you go second? Is there any other advantage or thing to help you come back from just going second and not going first? And we're going to do this by talking about energy curves now. So if you go first, we'll have an even energy curve. Because if you remember from before in the channel phase, you channel 2 runes per turn. So you go from 2, and then on your next turn, it'd be 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. When you're going second, you'll channel 1 more rune at the start of your first channel phase. So you'll have an odd energy curve. You'll get the 2 runes that you start for your channel phase, and then you'll get 1 more active rune, putting you at 3 runes and putting you at an odd energy curve. So you'll start at 3 and then plus 2 subsequently, so it'd be 5, 7, 9, 11. And then since the rune deck goes up to 12 only, you'll hit 12 and not 13. So let's go for an example right here. So game turn 1. In game turn 1, our first player will get our 2 runes right here. Maybe he'll decide to use 2 of them, then so they'll be tapped. On game turn 2, it will be the second player's first turn. It'll be their first turn, even though there's 2 turns that have elapsed. And they'll get 3 runes right here. And maybe they decide to spend 2 of them to play a unit or something, and maybe save 1 rune right here for a potential spell to be used on their opponent's turn. Game turn 3 right here is the first player's second turn, so they'll get 4 runes here, which they can use. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. So talking a bit more about energy curves, normally if you don't do anything, it goes the normal 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, or 3, 5, 7, 9, blah, blah, blah. However, recycling runes can change your energy curve. So for example, right here, we have 4 runes right here, and we decide we want to play a Cemetery Attendant, which costs 3 energy and 1 purple power. So to do that, we will have to tap 3 Chaos runes. We recycle 1 Chaos rune right here. We'll end up with 3 runes at the end of our turn because 1 is recycled back into our rune deck. So on our next turn, we'll jump from 3 to 5 when we channel 2 runes, rather than if we did not have to pay for this recycle cost right here, we would go from 4 to 6. On our next turn, if we have a 6 drop and we really want to play it, we probably do not want to play our Cemetery Attendant this turn. Recycling too much can allow us to down cycle, so just be careful about this. Other things that mess up the energy curve is something like this battlefield right here. It says Obelisk of Power. At the start of each player's first beginning phase, that player channels 1 rune. So basically what happens is our first player will start off with 3 runes, 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. That's going to be their curve. And the second player will start off with 3 because they're going second, and then they'll get an additional 1 from Obelisk. So in total, they'll start with 4. Rather than 3. And again, once you hit your max runes, you don't have anything in your rune deck, you don't do anything extra, you don't draw any extra cards, you don't have to do anything. It's just that you don't channel any more runes in your subsequent turns once you don't have anything in your rune deck. So after talking about energy curves, it's a good idea to talk a bit more about seals. So seals are some staples in all the colors, so they're present in all the colors. So basically what it says right here, it costs 0 energy, it costs 1 corresponding color of power, so a blue seal costs a blue power. What it says right here is it says tap or exhaust, the symbol right here, reaction, it can be played as a reaction, to add a mental power. So basically all this means is by tapping the seal right here, we're able to generate a blue power. Again, tapping a seal will generate a power of the seal's color, so if we tap our Seal of Insight, we'll be able to generate a blue power. Normally, if we only had 3 purple runes right here, and we didn't have our seal, we can only play something like a Cemetery Attendant instead, which requires a purple power. But with the seal, all we need to do is we need to tap all 3 of these runes, as well as tap the seal, and that will be sufficient enough to pay for the cost of our Gemcrafts here. Let's look at a slightly different example. So right now we want to play both our Gemcraft here and our Seal of Insight. Both of them are in our hand right now. Before, our seal was already played, but this time it's in our hand and we want to play both. And we can play both. And we'll be going back to the topic of floating again. So what we need to do right here is first we need to tap 3 runes to generate 3 floated energy. So we have 3 energy floated right now. Next, we can use one of the tapped runes right here. We would recycle one of them to generate a blue power to then pay for our seal right here. So we can use that blue power to pay for our seal. So the seal goes to our base right here. It's already ready right here. The seal itself costs 0 energy. So essentially we still have 3 energy floated right here. Afterwards, we can then tap our seal right here to generate a blue power. And now this blue power will be our blue power that is going to be used to pay for our Gemcraft Seer. And again, we have 3 floated energy prior, so it's sufficient for us to play our Gemcraft Seer. Again, units come in with Summoning Sickness. A helpful tip, though, is to not play seals whenever. So I recommend you only playing seals on the turn they're going to be used. So seals come inactive, so they can be used basically right away. However, if you just play a seal raw and recycle a rune, for example, you'll be downcycled 1 energy. And on this turn, if you have 3 and you recycle 1, you'll be at 2. So the next turn you'll get 4 and 6. So you'll be down 1 energy compared to your opponent. Seals can also do a bunch of other things. So that power that it generates can not solely be used to just pay for units, can be used for other things. For example, of course, we can use this red seal. If we tap it, we can pay for this power cost right here for Captain Farron. We can also decide to tap our seal right here to pay for this Flame Chomper's effect. Flame Chomper says, when you discard me, you may pay a red power to play me instead. Normally what we have to do is we have to tap a rune, recycle that rune to pay for the power for Flame Chompers, but instead, if we have a seal, we can just tap the seal instead of recycling a rune. Secondly, we can also hide cards with seals, so the cost for hidden cards, again, is a rainbow power of any color, so we can tap a seal to hide a card as well, instead of recycling a rune. Secondly, we can tap seals for deflect costs. Basically, this is an ability that says opponents must pay a rainbow power to choose me with a spell or ability. So if we decide to play a spell on this enemy Kiana unit right here, normally we have to recycle a rune, but if we have a seal instead, we can just tap the seal to pay for that deflect cost right here. We'll talk more about deflect later, but hopefully this makes a bit more sense. So seals themselves are gears, and besides seals, there are other types of gears. Most of the time, gears can only be played to your base. Basically, all gear come in ready, so they're able to be used or tapped if they have an effect on the turn that they're played. Gears can also be affected by other spells, effects, or abilities that specify gears. Gears can also be recalled and killed, and when a gear is killed or discarded, it will enter into the trash. Gears also may have activated abilities, which normally are base speed, but there might be exceptions. On seals, it says reaction, so it's reaction speed. So let's look at some examples of some gears right here. We have Pack of Wonders right here. So this is a base speed tap. Tap this or exhaust this to return another friendly gear, unit, or hidden card to an owner's hand. We have another type of gear right here. Basically, it's here as a passive. It says at the start of your beginning phase, if you control a face down card, aka a hidden card out of battlefield, draw 1. Right here is an example of a gear that can be killed. So it says when you play this, you play a 1 might recruit token, and then you can kill it at any time, base speed, to recycle 4 cards from either your trash or your opponent's trash, or both, up to 4 cards. Zonya's Hourglass is a special type of gear. It can be hidden, so that means it can technically enter battlefield, even though it's a hidden card, and it can be played as a reaction, or it can be played to base. So if it's played to base, whichever unit dies next will be saved by Zonya's Hourglass and will die instead. But if it's hidden and reacted from a battlefield, again, remember, it only specifies here. So if a unit dies from another battlefield, it can't save it. Only to the battlefield it's hidden at. Next, we'll move on to a bunch of keywords and terms that are used throughout this game. Starting off, we have exhausting. So if you've seen previously before, tapping a card or moving it sideways means you're exhausting something. Before, we have talked about tapping a lot of runes to generate our energy, but also we can tap other cards to potentially have some kind of effect. And again, any of the tap cards, if they aren't removed, they will be untapped during the awakening phase. So for example, right here, we have a gear right here. It says recycle 3 from your trash, pay 1 energy, tap this card itself, and you're able to draw a card. Tapping ability can also be present in legends. So here we have a Victor legend, paying 1 energy, and tapping the legend card itself, you'll be able to summon a recruit unit token. Sometimes exhausting or tapping is not explicitly having this tap symbol. For example, this card meditation here says, as an additional cost to play this, you may exhaust a friendly unit. If you do, draw 2, otherwise draw 1. So you have another unit on base that is already active, and you decide to exhaust it by tapping it, you'll be able to draw 2 cards rather than 1. Another thing would be this gear right here. It doesn't explicitly have this symbol right here, but it does talk about exhausting. So it says when you buff a friendly unit, you may pay an orange power and exhaust this gear to ready that unit that you previously buffed. We'll go over some of these other key terms later as well. And again, as a cost for standard movement, you'd also have to tap the moving unit. Next, we have the opposite of tapping, which is readying units. Readying basically means untapping tap cards such that they can perform their action or ability once again. For example, we have this Noxus Hopeful that was at a battlefield. It moved back into our base right here. And then we play this First Mate card right here. It says, when you play me, ready another unit. So this Noxus Hopeful is a unit, and if I play First Mate, I can decide to ready my Noxus Hopeful again. I can stand him up, and then because he stood up, he can perform their actions again. So one thing he can do is this Noxus Hopeful can move to the other battlefield. So basically, he scored twice this turn, once from probably holding this battlefield right here, moving back, and then trying to conquer this battlefield right here. So there's other examples of other things that can ready other stuff, as we've seen before. This gear right here. When you buff a friendly unit, you may exhaust itself and pay an orange power to ready the buff unit. Note this only applies to readying units. Same with the First Mate before, it can only ready units. Another example right here is Misfortune. Basically on the bottom text it says, the first time I move each turn, you may ready something else that is exhausted. So note that it doesn't specify it being units, so it can basically ready whatever. Right here, we have a Warwick right here. It says, I enter ready. So basically, he comes into play ready, and he's able to move right away. So what are some potential things you can ready from Misfortune's ability, for example? You can basically ready anything that can be exhausted. So if it can be tapped, it can likely be readied. So you can ready units. You can ready legend abilities that have its own exhaust effect. You can ready runes themselves. So basically, if you ready another rune, you'll have an additional energy for that turn, because you can just tap it again to generate another energy. And you can ready another seal. So if you ready a seal, you'll have an additional power associated with the color of the seal. So next we'll move on to tokens. Throughout the presentation, and we've been talking about tokens. So what actually are tokens? So tokens are game objects created by spells or abilities during play. The token's owner is the player who controlled the effect that created the token, either by a spell or an ability. Tokens don't have any cost, so right here there's nothing on the top left side, and if they're a token unit, they might have a might, otherwise they might not have a might as well. They are colorless as well, so they're gray, they don't have a domain. An ability that can create one of these tokens right here is, for example, this Victor Leader Champion unit. It says when another non-recruit unit you control dies, play a 1 might recruit unit token to your base. So basically, if there's another unit that dies, then you'll be able to spawn a recruit unit to the base, and this recruit unit basically acts as a unit that can help you conquer or do stuff as well. Another way we can generate some tokens is, again, we've seen this legend a couple of times right here, paying 1 energy and tapping itself to generate a recruit unit token. Note that this Victor Legend ability means you can play the recruit token anywhere you can normally play units. So if you control a battlefield, you can play the token as a reinforcement. Otherwise, it can only be played to base. And tokens being played also are played exhausted as well, like other units. Another example right here is this gear right here, Forge of the Future. It's a gear, then when it's played, it just says play one might recruit token at your base. Another example of how we can generate tokens is through battlefields. So for this battlefield right here, Altar of Unity, it says when you hold here, so at the start of your turn, basically, you would be able to generate a 1 might recruit unit token at your base. Another example, there's not only a recruit unit tokens, there's other types of tokens, such as a sprite token right here. It says play a ready 3 might sprite unit token with temporary. However, this game is still quite new, and there's only these 2 types of tokens released so far, but potentially there will be more tokens later. Okay, so a bit more about tokens. Tokens are not considered cards because they're not from your main deck. So basically, whenever you play a spell or an ability to generate these tokens, they are grabbed from a separate pile that is not from your main deck, it's just on the side. Another thing to note, that tokens that leave the board immediately fizzle out and cease to exist. And basically, the board includes only your base and battlefield, so if a token returns to your hand, or they die from combat, they don't go to trash, or they don't get returned back to your hand. So let's see what happens. So, for example, if token units are killed, they do not go to trash and are set aside again onto a separate pile instead. Similarly, like right here, we have a Wrath of Echoes attacking the battlefield controlled by just the run recruit unit right here. The recruit will die, and that recruit will be sent just out of the board, not to the trash. Similarly, tokens cannot return to your hand, and they are removed from play if they are returned to a player's hand. For example, if the opponent played this spell Gust on towards a token, it says return a unit at a battlefield with 3 might or less to the owner's hand, the token will go back to your hand, and then it'll just kind of fizzle out and it has to be removed from your hand, and just leave your hand right away and just put on the side of the board. So the next keyword that we're going to go through is Accelerate. Basically, with an optional additional cost, your units will enter ready when they are played from your hand, rather than have Summoning Sickness, so they'll be able to move on the first turn that they're played. So an example of this is Legion Rearguard right here. It has the ability Accelerate. It says you may pay 1 energy plus a red power as an additional cost to have me enter ready. So if you decide to not have him enter ready, all you need to do is pay his base cost, so no Accelerate, it means he just requires 2 energy. However, if you want to play him accelerated, basically try to move him on the turn he is played, you will need to pay 3 energy plus 1 red power. So it's 2 plus 1 energy right here, and then plus an additional red power right here. So an additional example right here is this Echo right here. He also has the Accelerate ability. It says you may pay an additional 1 energy and 1 blue power as an additional cost to have me enter ready. So if you don't want to accelerate him, you need to pay the base cost of 5 energy as well as 1 blue power. However, if you do want to accelerate him, you need to pay 6 energy plus 2 blue power. It's keyword of Deathknell. So basically Deathknell is an ability that triggers when a unit dies. For example, right here, we have this Watchful Sentry right here. It says Deathknell, draw 1. Basically, when this unit dies, either from combat damage or spell damage or gets removed from whatever reason, you'll be able to draw 1 card from your main deck. Soaring Scout right here, when it dies, it channels 1 rune exhausted, so you'll get a rune from the top of your rune deck that is played tapped, so essentially you'll ramp 1 energy for your energy curve. Machine Evangel right here, Deathknell, it says play 3 1 might recruit unit tokens in your base, so when it dies, it also summons 3 little 1 might recruit tokens into your base. And we have this Kog'Maw right here, it says Deathknell, deal 4 to all units at my battlefield. So when it dies, I'll also deal basically like a 4 damage wipe towards a battlefield. So let's look at some interactions with Deathknell here. So right here we have Zhonya's Hourglass. It basically says the next time a friendly unit will die, Zhonya's Hourglass will die in its stead. Instead, the unit will be recalled exhausted rather than dying, and Zhonya's Hourglass will take the hit instead. So what if the unit that died was a Deathknell unit? Deathknell will not trigger because Zhonya's died instead of the Deathknell unit actually dying. It just got recalled back to the base, exhausted. Right here, Possession. For example, if you play Possession onto an enemy unit that is Deathknell, you're taking control of your opponent's Deathknell unit. When your opponent's Deathknell unit dies to your opponent, you will get that Deathknell trigger and effect. However, just note that when your opponent's Deathknell unit that you control dies, it returns back to your opponent's trash. Similarly with Kog'Maw right here, it says when it dies, it deals 4 damage to all units at my battlefield, and Deathknell will trigger before units heal after surviving combat damage. So basically, if Kog'Maw was fighting like a 5 might unit, it will first deal 1 combat damage to it. The 5 might unit from the opposing enemy will deal 5 might to Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw will die and deal an additional 4 splash damage to the opponent. Hence, basically, Kog'Maw is able to deal 5 damage total, so 1 plus 4, before the opposing unit heals from surviving the combat showdown of that 1 damage that Kog'Maw initially dealt. Similarly, triggered abilities are placed first on the stack by the active player. So if, for example, if there's this board wipe right here, it says basically deal 12 to all units at battlefields. If you cast Unchecked Power and both you and your opponent both have Deathknell units, your opponent's Deathknell will be placed last on the stack and resolve first. So your opponent will get their Deathknell trigger first before you do. Just on the topic of Unchecked Power and board wipes, something to note is that besides Deathknell, units who die don't see themselves dying. So for example, when you have a Victor, this card says when another non-recruit unit you control dies, play a 1 might recruit unit token into your base. So if Victor and another allied unit that's not a token were at a battlefield and it got unchecked power by the enemy, both the Victor and the other unit will die. Since it's simultaneous, Victor will not see the other unit dying from unchecked power, and hence you won't generate a 1 might recruit unit token at your base. Similarly, if Victor and an allied unit is attacking a battlefield, and they both die from combat damage, you don't choose who dies first. They both basically die at the same time, and Victor's effect will not activate. So the next keyword we're going to be talking about is Deflect, and basically it's a keyword that says opponents must pay an additional power or powers to target the card with Deflect, so either by a spell or an ability. And basically if your unit has Deflect, it basically dissuades your opponent from trying to target it with a spell or an ability because they have to pay some power and downcycle themselves. Multiple instances of Deflect can stack and are summed if they are stacked, and Deflect is a passive and not a triggered ability. So let's take a look at some of these examples right here. So we have Kiana right here. It says Deflect. Opponents must pay additional rainbow power to choose me with a spell or ability. So if you want to target Kiana with a spell, you want to target Kiana with an ability or anything that targets it, the opponent will need to pay the Deflect cost. Note that you do not have to pay Deflect cost for maybe trying to buff your Kiana with a discipline or on guard or anything. It only applies to your opponent. Another example right here is this big fat volley bear right here. It's Deflect 2. So instead of paying only 1 power of any color, it's 2 power of any color to try to target this volley bear. Besides units having innately the keyword Deflect, it can be granted as well from this Spirit's Refuge card. It says friendly buffed units have Deflect if they don't have it already. When this gear is in play on your field, basically all your buffed units, we'll talk about buffs later, will have an innate Deflect themselves. To get a better understanding of whether or not you need to pay a Deflect cost, we need to first understand what targets. So all of these will target. So for example, this spell right here, it says deal 4 to a unit at a battlefield, draw 1. So you're choosing a unit at a battlefield, and if that unit has a Deflect keyword, you will need to pay this additional power to target that unit at the battlefield. Similarly, this also applies to abilities like the Snapvine ability. When you play me, choose an enemy unit at a battlefield. You're choosing, so you're targeting that enemy unit, hence you will need to pay the Deflect cost. And it does target with 1 trigger. This volley bear right here, besides its innate Deflect, we'll look at the bottom right here. It says when I attack, deal 5 damage split amongst any number of enemy units here. So when you first send volley bear into attack, you will have to choose 1 or more units to do that split damage amongst those units. And then if you only choose 1, that will only be 1 trigger. And if you choose 2, then that'll be 2 instances of targeting. And if both of those units have an innate Deflect, then you will need to pay 2 Deflect costs. Again, right here, we have 2 targets right here with our Teemo strategist. So basically, it says when I defend or I am revealed from hidden, reveal the top 5 cards of your main deck, and then I'll deal 1 damage to each of the enemy units chosen with each card that is revealed to be a hidden card from your main deck. So again, kind of like Volley Bear, when you first reveal Teemo or defend with Teemo, you would need to choose your target or targets to hit with potential damage from your Teemo. And again, if they both have Deflect, you will need to pay 2 Deflect costs. If one of them have Deflect, one doesn't, then you only need to play 1 Deflect cost. Next, we have Icathian Rain. So it says do this 6 times, deal 2 to a unit. So 6 times 2 is 12, so it's the max damage you can deal is 12. However, if you're targeting a unit with Deflect, you will need to pay multiple instances of Deflect because you are choosing it multiple times. So for example, if there's a Deflect unit with 10 might, for example, you would need 5 of these triggers to kill it. So you choose it 5 times, and hence you will need to pay 5 Deflect costs. Something to just note about this card of Icathian Rain is sometimes you want to over-assign some spell damage to ensure you kill a priority enemy unit. For example, right here, we have the enemy has a Magma Worm right here with 8 might, and he has also 3 different Legion Rearguards. They're all 2 might units each. So the total right here is 8 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. That is 10, 12, 14. Icathian Rain can deal a max of 12 damage. Ideally, you really want to kill this Magma Worm, so you'll at least assign 4 triggers onto it, so 4 times 2 is 8 damage, and then you can kill 2 other recruits with your remaining 2 triggers. However, sometimes if they have a potential reaction card to increase the Magma Worm's might, you might want to overkill the Magma Worm so that even if they respond with a potential plus 2 might, it will certainly die. So, for example, you might want to put 5 or 6 triggers onto the Magma Worm and maybe not kill one of the extra Legion Rearguards instead to ensure that you kill the Magma Worm, if that makes sense. So all in all of these examples right here, you will need to pay 1 Deflect or multiple instances of Deflect costs if you are targeting a enemy unit with Deflect. So now let's look at some things that you don't need to pay for Deflect costs. So for example, this spell right here, it says choose a battlefield, give friendly units there plus 1 might this turn, and enemy units there minus 1 might this turn, to a minimum of 1 might. So in this instance, it's basically targeting all the enemy units there. So you're not choosing a specific enemy unit. So even if they have enemy units with Deflect there, you will not have to pay the Deflect cost for this. Another example, similarly, is this legend effect from Ari. When someone's attacking into you, into a battlefield you control, they get -1 might this turn. So basically, whenever this happens, this always kind of triggers. So you're not choosing to target the enemy unit. It always happens. So that means you don't really need to play a deflect cost, if that kind of makes sense. Similarly, with this spell right here, it says each player kills one of their units. If the opponent or you play that spell, the other person is choosing what to kill. You're not choosing what to kill. They get a choice. They just need to kill something if they can. You do not need to pay the deflect cost for Call of the Week. Lastly, for this Anivia right here, it says when I attack, this is an ability, deal 3 to all enemy units here. Again, it doesn't specify a specific enemy, so you're not choosing something, and hence you do not need to pay deflect for deflect costs. So getting into more of the gray area of things, there's something also called reflexive targeting, and these two cards are an example of that. And as of this video's production right now, it's unconfirmed whether or not Deflect applies, but once the game officially launches and we get an official answer from Riot, hopefully I'll be able to update the comments in this video to answer whether or not Deflect applies to reflexive targeting as well. Moving on, we will talk about this term in Riftbound where it says do as much as possible, unless it says may or must. So for this card right here, Dragon's Rage, it says move an enemy unit, then choose another enemy unit at its destination. They deal damage equal to their mights to each other. If there isn't another enemy unit at the destination, you can just move an enemy unit, because you can just do as much as possible on the card. Essentially, it is just a more expensive charm, because charm itself is a card that says move an enemy unit. So if you have this card, you can still play it to move an enemy unit, even though you don't need to use the other part of its effect. Another example of this is Traveling Merchant. It says, when I move, discard one card that's from your hand, and then draw one card from your main deck. So for example, if I don't have any cards in my hand, when the Traveling Merchant moves, you don't have to discard one anymore because you don't have any cards in your hand to discard. You would just complete the other effect, which is draw one. So if there's no cards in your hand, you just draw one. But if there's at least one card in your hand, then you need to discard a card from your hand, and then you would need to draw another one from the main deck. Opposing of this, unless it says must. So Deflect says opponents must pay power to choose me with a spell or ability. So if you don't have any power, you're not generating power, you for some reason don't have any runes left or seals left, you cannot target Kiana with a spell or an ability. Secondly, for this card right here, Super Mega Death Rocket, so it says when you conquer, you may discard one card from your hand to return this from your trash to your hand. So when this is in the trash, you want to grab it back from the trash, put it back to your hand. If you don't have a card in your hand, you cannot return Super Mega Death Rocket back to your hand because you have nothing to discard. Basically, it means when you don't have any cards in your hand, you also may not be able to use Super Mega Death Rocket's ability and return it back. So the next keyword that we're going to be looking at is Ganking. It is a passive ability, and units with this keyword can move from battlefield to battlefield. Note that multiple instances of Ganking does not stack. So for example, right here in the beginning phase, my Kayn will score a point for holding this battlefield right here, and then I can decide to move him directly to the next battlefield across, skipping the need to go from base and then moving to the other battlefield because my Kayn right here has Ganking. So he moves across and he can score a point from conquering. Secondly, we have this doggo right here. If it's placed from ability or if it's innately just awakened during the awakening phase, it's placed on Windswept Hillock and it's active. It says units here have Ganking, so although cemeterially attended innately do not have Ganking, it is granted Ganking by this battlefield right here, and hence it is able to move to back Alibar, or I can retreat it to base, or I can just keep it stuck here into this battlefield. Next, we'll be talking about buffing. Buffing means we're going to be putting a marker on the unit, and when that unit is buffed, it will get +1 might. So prior, there are spells that says give a unit +2 might, blah 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 blah, but if it doesn't specifically say buff, it is not a buff in this game. So a buff in this game specifically says buffing and giving it a marker that gives it +1 might. By default, buffs do not stack, so you can only have a maximum of 1 buff. And buffs persist throughout the game if they are not removed or spent. For example, you can move around with your unit, their buff will still remain. You can end your turn and your buff will still remain on the unit. Note that buffs can be removed by effects or abilities by characters. or by the character leaving the board. So if you have a unit that is being recalled back to your hand, it will lose the buff. Or if the unit is being sent to trash, it will lose buff. So the marker that appears right here will signify an instance of this unit being buffed right here. Now let's take a look at some cards that interact with buffs or give buffs. So right here we have Pit Rookie right here. It says when you play me, buff another friendly unit. Basically when you play Pit Rookie, you're able to buff another unit that you control. Similarly, this is the Lee Sin Legend right here. It says pay 1 mana, exhaust this Lee Sin Legend, and then you're able to buff a friendly unit. Cythria right here doesn't buff another unit, but it says when you play another unit, buff me. So once Cythria is on board and you play another unit, Cythria will get a +1 buff, so essentially she'll be at 2 mice. There's also this card called Arena Bar right here. It's a gear, and basically every turn you're able to exhaust it to instead buff a friendly unit. Again, exhausted stuff restands during the awakening phase, basically at the start of your turn. Some other cards that interact with buffs. So we have this Udyr right here. It says spend my buff, choose one you've not chosen this turn. So if Udyr is buffed, you'll have 7 might, and I'll have a counter on him. And you can decide to remove that buff, remove that counter, so it'll drop back to its innate 6 to do one of these effects listed right here. We have this legend set, and it says when a buff unit you control would die, you may pay a power of any color and exhaust me, which is the set legend card right here, to spend its buff and recall it exhausted instead. So if a unit that is already buffed is dying from a spell or an ability or from combat damage, you can first tap your set legend over. You would need to pay a power, that's probably by recycling a rune or tapping a seal, and then instead of that unit getting sent to the trash, it will be recalled to base exhausted instead. So it'll be put back into your base in an exhausted state. Right here we have this Lee Sin champion unit here. It says tap himself or exhaust himself to buff himself. And I just note that if you do decide to tap him, he will not be able to move that turn unless you have another way of readying him, because as a cost for standard movement, again, is by exhausting the unit that is moving. He also have a second condition right here. It says I can have any number of buffs. So essentially you can, instead of the restriction of only being able to have 1 buff, then Lee Sin can get as many buffs as possible by any means you're giving buffs to him. So again, if your opponent decides to play Rebuke onto your Lee Sin, it says return a unit out of battlefield to its owner's hand. So if Lee Sin is returned back to the hand, then it will lose all its buffs, which is unfortunate. Okay, moving on to the next keyword, it is Shield and Assault. Essentially, they're abilities that cannot be reacted to. Assault applies to attackers, and Shield applies to defenders. Assault means that when attacking, they'll get additional might, and Shield means when they're defending, they'll also get additional might. So you see the really importance of understanding which unit is attacking and which unit is defending during a combat showdown. These keywords can be granted or lost, and they can stack, and if they stack, they're summoned. Right here, we have a Leona right here. It says Shield, just Shield 1. It says +1 might while I'm defender. So if it's just sitting on a field right here, Leona is not considered attacking or defending. So right here, this Leona right here is able to be Void Seekered right here. So it doesn't get that +1 might. Void Seeker deals 4 to a unit of battlefield. Leona has 4 might right here, so she'll die. So she's not defending right now, so she's technically still a 4 might unit and not a 5 might unit right here. Now, the non-red player is attacking with Chemtech Enforcer right here. So now, since it's a combat showdown right here, then defender and attacker is applied. So Leona will be the defender because she was originally controlling this battlefield, and Chemtech Enforcer will be the attacker right here. Hence, Leona will get +1 might because of shield, because she's a defender, and Chemtech Enforcer, if you look sideways, it says Assault 2, +2 might while I'm an attacker, so it'll be at +2, it'll be at 4 might total for Chemtech Enforcer, 5 might total for Leona, and Leona will win this trade. Attempting to conquer an open battlefield will not designate attacker status, and Assault will not apply. When Chemtech Enforcer comes in right here, because there's no enemy unit right here, there's no combat starting, there's a showdown starting, it's a non-combat showdown if you recall that from before. From this, no combat means that the Assault passive does not apply, so hence Chemtech Enforcer is still remaining at 2 might, and in response the opponent can play something like a Gust to deny Chemtech Enforcer from trying to conquer this battlefield right here. So we've been talking a lot about passives, so basically what's the difference between a passive and a triggered ability? So passives are basically an innate condition that is constantly checked, and essentially, basically, it cannot be reacted to by reactions, whereas triggered spells add something to the chain, and thereby most of them can be reacted to. Passives have the terms while and if, and triggered abilities have when and at. For example, right here, Chemtech Enforcer, Assault, it says +2 might while I'm an attacker, so you basically can't react to this. Yasuo right here, it says when I attack, deal damage equal to my might to an enemy unit here. When Yasuo attacks, he will put his ability on the chain and then choose a target, and then it can be reacted to. So let's look at some additional examples of passives. Right here we have a battlefield called Trifarian War Camp. It says units here have +1 might. Basically, you can't react to units here that are entering or being played here. They'll all have +1 might right here. Secondly, we have some conditional passive abilities. It says while I'm attacking or defending alone, I have +2 might. Well, cannot react to this. Secondly, Vayne right here says if an opponent controls a battlefield, I enter ready. You cannot stop Vayne from entering ready. Next, after we're talking about passives, let's talk a bit more about triggered abilities and the timing of them. When there's two instances of triggered ability between an attacker and defender, the attacker places its ability on the stack before the defender, and hence the defender thing resolves first before the attacker. And you can only play reactions, not actions, in response because it's all these things add to start a chain, and you can't play actions in the middle of a chain, only reactions. So there's this battlefield that says, right here, when you defend here, you may move a friendly unit here to base. And there's also this card right here, Yasuo, he's attacking. It says, when I attack, deal damage equal to my might, his might is 6 right now, to an enemy unit. So Yasuo attacks, the red player is defending. Yasuo attacks, he adds his ability on the chain, he is targeting the Jinx right here, so the attacker Yasuo ability will go first on the chain, and then Reaver's Row would go on the chain, because defender goes on after attacker. It says, when you defend here, you may move a friendly unit here to base. First, the Reaver's Row will resolve before the Yasuo trigger resolves. So, from here, Yasuo swings in, targets Jinx with Yasuo ability. Reaver's Row triggers afterwards because this triggers first. It's placed last on the stack. The red player has two different options. They can allow Jinx to stay in combat. So if Jinx does not retreat from Reaver's Row because it says may, so you can stay or leave. If Jinx stays, Yasuo's ability will then resolve right here. And then it'll strike Jinx and Jinx will die. And then the combat showdown will continue between Yasuo and Noxus Hopeful because Jinx just perished. If the red player instead decides to retreat the Jinx right here, Jinx retreats back to base, and then Yasuo's ability loses Jinx's designated target because it says here. So it says when I attack, deal damage equal to my might to an enemy unit. There's here, right here, I didn't add it here. But there's here, so because Jinx is no longer here and it was originally targeting Jinx here, Yasuo's ability will not suddenly shift over to Noxus Hopeful at all. It'll just fizzle out. And then afterwards, combat showdown will continue again between Yasuo and Noxus Hopeful. So they'll be fighting 4 might against 6 might right here. So the next keyword we'll be looking at is temporary. It is a triggered ability keyword and it does not stack. As of the recording of this video, there's only really one card that interacts with temporary right now. It's Sprite's Call. It says play a ready 3 might sprite token with temporary. And all temporary means is at the start of the controller's beginning phase, before scoring by holding, the unit will die by temporary because it's temporary. It doesn't last forever. Temporary units can also kill before it kills itself with temporary, so it can be killed with a spell through combat or something. It can die before it dies from temporary. An interaction with temporary is with, again, Zhonya's Hourglass, so let's take a look at this. So just remember, Zhonya's Hourglass says the next time a friendly unit will die, kill this instead, recall that unit exhausted. So if I both have a temporary 3 might Sprite's Call, and I have a Zhonya's Hourglass, and temporary triggers at the start of my beginning phase, Sprite's Call will technically die, but because it is attempting to die, Zhonya's Hourglass will die instead, and Sprite's Call will still live. However, its temporary keyword is not removed. So, hence, at the start of the next turn, when you don't have a Zhonya's Hourglass anymore, then Sprite's Call will die. So the next keyword we'll be looking at is Vision. It is a triggered ability keyword, and it can stack. When it does stack, multiple instances of Vision will trigger separately. A unit that has the Vision keyword basically says when a unit with Vision is played, look at the top card of your main deck. You may recycle it or not. So if you do decide to recycle it, it's a method to sift through your deck and trying to get the cards you want. When you are looking at cards with Vision, and if you do decide to recycle it, you do not need to show the opponent the card you did recycle. So again, recycling, just putting it back to the bottom of your main deck. So for example, right here, if I do decide to play Gemcraft Seer, then I will be able to look at the top card of my main deck, and I can decide if I want to recycle it or not. Gemcraft Seer also has another ability that says, give other friendly units also Vision. When something like a Faithful Manufacturer is played alongside a Recruit token, both of these can gain the Vision keyword right here, because they are friendly units alongside with Gemcraft Seer. You would get another trigger of Vision from Faithful Manufacturer, so when Faithful Manufacturer is played, you can decide to look at one card and recycle it if you want to. And then, since Faithful Manufacturer generates a Recruit unit token right here again, the Recruit also will get Vision as well, and again, you can decide to recycle a card if you want. So what if you have two Gemcraft Seers instead, and then you play a Faithful Manufacturer? Then, when you play that Faithful Manufacturer, you'll get two instances of Vision because a Vision can stack. So you're able to look at one card, recycle if you want, and then one card, recycle it if you want from Faithful Manufacturer. And then, when the Recruit token is summoned by Faithful Manufacturer, again, it gets two instances of Vision, and total, you'll have four instances of Vision when you play Faithful Manufacturer, when you already have two Gemcraft Seers on the board. We first need to now establish a groundwork before looking at other keywords. So moving back to recycling. Recycling is just putting stuff onto the bottom of its respective deck. So if we're recycling runes, they go to the bottom of the rune deck, and if we're recycling main deck cards, they're going back to the bottom of the main deck. Something that interacts with recycling, for example, is probably something like Karma. It says when you recycle one or more cards, buff a friendly unit. Or something like this right here. It says recycle one from your trash. So what does it mean recycling one from your trash? So that means when you have cards in your trash, you can decide to choose one of the cards from your trash and then put it at the bottom of your main deck. And then in response, you're able to give Vi one might this turn. So if you recycle one that from your trash, you put a card from your trash back down to the bottom of your main deck, you will get the Vi to 4 might. Of course, this ability right here is base speed because it doesn't signify action or reaction. And this can be used multiple times in one turn. So basically you can decide, if you have multiple cards in your trash, you can decide to use this ability multiple times. So you can decide to recycle one, give Vi +1, and then recycle one again, give Vi another +1, recycle one again, give another +1. So a total of 3 +1 +1 +1 will be 6 might from Vi. So essentially if you have cards that are in your trash, you're able to buff Vi, and this is for this turn only as well. Again, this is base speed, meaning that you can't be using this ability during your opponent's turn or during a combat showdown or a showdown in general. Lastly, we have this battlefield right here. It says Sigil of Storm. When you conquer here, recycle one of your runes. So when we're recycling one of our runes, normally we get a power generated from them. However, if you're recycling in order to pay for something, just to pay for your conquer right here, you will not get a power generated from Sigil of Storm because it's being recycled as a cost. So a bit more into recycling. When recycling 2 or more cards to your main deck simultaneously, they are placed at the bottom of your main deck in a random order unless otherwise stated. So if you have this card, Garbage Grabber, for example, it says recycle 3 from your trash, so you get to choose 3 cards from your trash and put them back in your main deck. However, when you're recycling them back to your main deck, you don't get to choose which card is at the bottom. Secondly, we another example right here is Candlelit Sanctum. When you conquer here, look at the top 2 cards of your main deck. You may recycle one or both of them. Put those you don't back in any order. So if you do choose to recycle both of them, you don't get to choose which one of the 2 are placed at the bottom. It'll be random. This, of course, will not apply to runes, so when recycling 2 more runes simultaneously to your rune deck, you can choose which order in which to place your runes at the bottom right here. So now let's take a deeper look into this Karma card right here. So again, what are considered cards in Riftbound again? So in Riftbound, cards are items derived from your 40 card main deck, including your chosen champion because it is from your main deck. So what aren't considered cards? So tokens are not considered cards, runes are not considered cards, so if you're deciding to recycle a rune to generate a power, it does not activate Karma's ability right here. Legends themselves are not also considered cards right here. Now that we know what is considered a card, we can now look at the next keyword, which is Legion. So basically Legion is trigger its effect if you played another card, so what are cards again, from your main deck this turn. Let's take a look at some examples right here. We have the Noxus Hopeful that we've been seeing in this video all along. It says Legion, I cost 2 energy less. So if you played another card this turn, for example you played another unit this turn, instead of costing 4 energy, the Noxus Hopeful will only cost 2 energy. Another example right here, Vanguard Captain. Legion, when you play me, play 2 1 might recruit unit tokens here. So if you played another card this turn, then you're able to generate 2 recruit unit tokens here. Note, you're able to still play all these cards raw without the Legion effect, it's just that you won't get its benefit. So you can play Noxus Hopeful raw for 4 energy, or you can play Vanguard Captain for 3 energy, 1 yellow power, however you won't get the 2 recruit units alongside with the Vanguard Captain. So besides units, legions can also apply to spells and legend abilities. So right here we have a Noxian Guillotine right here. It says for normally without its legion effect, it's an action spell. It says choose a unit, kill it the next time it takes damage this turn. Its normal effect is pretty good. However, with the Legion effect is even better. It just kills the unit now instead. If you play another card this turn, then you play Noxian Guillotine, is able to just kill it. You can also see this with Darius Legend right here. It says tap the Darius Legend. It can be played at reaction speed. With Legion, it says add 1 energy. So if you played another card this turn, you just tap your Darius Legend to get 1 energy. If you don't decide to use its Legion effect, you just use it as a reaction, you just tap Darius, nothing will happen here. You just tap it, you just exhaust Darius, you won't be able to get that 1 energy because you didn't play another card this turn and the Legion didn't trigger. So the next keyword we're going to be looking at is tank. Tank is a passive ability, and units with tank must be assigned combat damage first. It's a must, not a may. For example, right here, if there's a Brazen Buccaneer that is attacking red, this Madden Marauder has this tank right here, and although you really want to kill this RA because she'll score 2 points from holding, essentially, you cannot target the RA, so your Brazen Buccaneer must target the Madden Marauder, and Madden Marauder will take the hit, and of course you'll die back because they have 8 total might against your 5. If there are 2 units of tank, you can choose to distribute the combat damage between the 2 because they have both tank, so both must be assigned combat damage first. Multiple instances of tank also does not stack. Moving on to the next keyword, we have stun. So a unit that is stunned does not deal any combat damage. A stunned unit will still have health, and a stunned unit is still able to move, and a stunned unit cannot be stunned again. A stunned unit will lose their stunned status at the beginning of their next end step. So basically, once you end your turn, your units will be unstunned. So let's take an example right here. So we're attacking with Leona and Legion Rearguard here. Leona, if you can read just slightly on the side, it says when I attack, stun an enemy unit here. Here is referencing wherever Leona is. So Leona goes and attacks. There's an attack trigger. The stun gets put on the stack. When the stun resolves, there's only 1 target here, so Stormclaw Ursine is stunned, and hence Stormclaw cannot deal that 6 damage back to Leona and Legion Rearguard. But we can still deal damage to it, so 4 plus 2 is 6, so Stormclaw will die from this trade, and normally if Stormclaw wasn't stunned, then he'll able to respond and kill both the Leona and Legion Rearguard as it dies. However, since it's stunned, it doesn't deal combat damage, so both of my units will survive right here, and Stormclaw Ursine will die. Let's take a look at another example where I'm attacking with Leona and I don't have the Legion Rearguard with me. So again, the attack trigger goes through, Stormclaw Ursine gets stunned. Ursine can no longer deal any damage to Leona, but Leona herself can only deal 4 damage to Ursine. So Ursine will survive at 2 HP. So in this case, right here, if you lack the damage to conquer a battlefield, the attackers are returned to base. So instead of Leona conquering this battlefield, Stormclaw Ursine will survive right here. Leona will have to retreat back to its base, and because combat ended, Stormclaw Ursine will heal back to 6, although still it cannot do combat damage this turn until the end of the turn. Now let's take a look at some stun interactions. So besides units that can stun, spells can also stun, like this Rune Prison right here. There's an interaction with Solari Chief right here. It says when you play me, choose an enemy unit. If it is stunned, kill it, otherwise stun it. Pretty self-explanatory. There's also legends that interact with stun. So the Leona legend here says when you stun 1 or more enemy units, buff a friendly unit. This can be done multiple times per turn because it does not exhaust Leona when this ability is triggered from the condition. Something interesting as well is this Leona signature spell, Zenith Blade. It's an action spell. It says stun an enemy unit at a battlefield. You may move a friendly unit to the enemy unit's battlefield. It's a pretty cool interaction. Something to note about this is it does cause sometimes a bunch of confusion. For example, if we have 2 separate battlefields right here with a red player, each having a red player has 1 unit on each of them, and then the blue player comes in to attack Altar of Unity. As an action, they decide to play Zenith Blade, and they target the red unit on this battlefield, and they decide to move 1 of the blue units over. Then in this case, this combat showdown has to resolve first before this combat showdown resolves right here. So it's an instance of kind of 2 showdowns occurring simultaneously, although not really simultaneously since one has to go resolve first before the other one. Next, we'll move on to the keyword mighty, or the term mighty instead. A unit is mighty when it has 5 or more might, and a unit is no longer mighty when it drops below 5 might. and Mighty does not stack. So two cards that interact with Mighty are something like Fiora right here. It says while I am Mighty, so while is a passive. I have Deflect, Ganking, and Shield. So a Fiora, when she is, per se, given might by a spell, or if she receives a buff, she will be at 5 or greater might, and she'll gain the keywords Deflect, Ganking, and Shield. So Deflect is if opponents have to target Fiora, they have to pay a power cost. Ganking is moving from battlefield to battlefield, and Shield is while she is defending, she has +1 might as well. Another one that interacts with Mighty is this Volibear legend right here. It says, when you play a Mighty unit, you may exhaust me to channel 1 rune exhausted. So once you play a unit with 5 or more might, then you will tap Volibear and you'll be able to grab a rune from the top of your rune deck in an exhausted state, essentially ramping 1. On the topic of looking at some words, keywords, and stuff right here, there's other reference text right here. So for example, this Fiora Victorious is Fiora, and she's from Demacia. So although this is not relevant for the cards I'm seeing right now and the game state right now, there might be potential other synergies that use this reference text. For example, potentially there might be an action spell that says all Demacian units gain +1 might, and that will apply to Fiora, but potentially not apply to other units. So now let's take a look at non-standard movement. So previously I've been talking a lot about standard movement, where as a cost to move you need to exhaust your unit, but there's also non-standard movement in this game. So for example, right here in this state right here, there's a battlefield with Noxus Hopeful on it, and there's another battlefield with an enemy White Flame Protector on it right here. If the red player, the enemy unit, casts a charm onto Noxus Hopeful, so charm says move an enemy unit, charm cannot be used to move White Flame Protector, it can only be an enemy unit, which is a not red unit in this case. So in this case, the choices for charm on where Noxus Hopeful can move is actually 2 different places. It can charm Noxus Hopeful back to base, or it can charm Noxus Hopeful into back alley bar. And when Noxus Hopeful is charmed over, it will still be in its exhausted state, and if Noxus Hopeful was active and it was charmed over, it will be in its active state. When Noxus Hopeful is charmed over to back alley bar, it will cause a combat showdown, and in this case, Noxus Hopeful will be attempting to attack the battlefield controlled by White Flame Protector, so White Flame Protector will be defending in this case. Obviously, when Noxus Hopeful is charmed over, 4 might does not win against that 8 might White Flame Protector, so Noxus Hopeful will perish. Charm is a good card to potentially use as a removal tool as well. Let's take a look at another example right here. So we have this board state right here, we have a Yasuo right here at base, and we have a enemy Blazing Scorcher right here on this battlefield right here. Yasuo says, when I attack, deal damage equal to my might 6 to an enemy unit here. So if I have this Yasuo Legend alongside right here, if I'm controlling Yasuo Legend and the Yasuo Champion, Yasuo Legend says this: pay 2 energy, exhaust the Yasuo Legend, and you can move a friendly unit to or from your base. So if I decide to pay energy, then tap my Yasuo Legend right here, I can move a friendly unit to or from my base, and this will be non-standard movement. So that means I'm able to move my Yasuo without tapping him as a cost to just move him straight to this battlefield right here. The attack trigger triggers, does 6 damage to Blazing Scorcher, and I basically just win the trade. So Blazing Scorcher dies, and still, because I am still in an active state, I am still able to use my standard movement. For example, maybe I want to retreat back to base, because potentially there might be spells that target me at a battlefield and try to kill me at a battlefield. So I can decide to use, because I was already in an active state, I can decide to retreat back to base. Let's take a look at another example right here. So we have this board state right here. Again, we have our Yasuo Legend right here. So normally, Yasuo does not have ganking keywords, so it can't go from the back alley bar battlefield to the Altar of Unity battlefield. But in this case, with the Yasuo Legend, it is able to. So what we'll do first is we'll pay 2 energy, exhaust our Yasuo Legend, and then we'll do a non-standard movement of Yasuo moving back to base. And again, moving back to base by non-standard movement does not exhaust my Yasuo right here, and hence I am able to swing at this battlefield right here, killing Blazing Scorcher with my when I attack trigger right here. Let's take a look at another example to really hammer down this concept right here. So pretend I played Undercover Agent to my base right here. And again, I'm controlling Yasuo Legend, and I'm able to tap my Yasuo Legend in order to move my Undercover Agent to a battlefield, because the Yasuo Legend never specifies that I need to move an active or an exhausted unit, so I can do both. So I can move an active or an exhausted unit through non-standard movement by my Yasuo Legend's ability. However, it is noted that non-standard movement cannot be combined with standard movement. So in this case, if I move my Undercover Agent just with Yasuo, it will immediately start a combat with this Udyr right here. And I will lose this combat because it's 6 versus 5. So normally what you think you want to do is you want to use the Lasso Legend ability alongside a standard movement of moving Clockwork Keeper in towards back alley bar to do 7 against that 6. However, because non-standard movement cannot be combined with standard movement, which will be the Clockwork Keeper moving to back alley bar, you cannot do this. So moving Undercover Agent using Yasuo Legend's ability is not a good idea in this case, because it's just sending your Undercover Agent to die against this Udyr right here. So something similar to this is not non-standard movement, but has something to do with this card called Possession. So Possession says, choose an enemy unit out of battlefield, take control of it, and recall it, send it to your base. This is not a move. For example, if I play Possession right here, targeting Blazing Scorcher, I am able to possess it. And when I'm possessing it, I possess the state that it was in. So if the enemy's Blazing Scorcher was active, I get it active. If the enemy's Blazing Scorcher was exhausted and tapped, I will receive it exhausted and tapped. And since I played the Possession right here and it's active, I'm still able to issue a standard movement with the opponent's Blazing Scorcher and score myself a Conquer point right here. So sometimes in Riftbound, some things happen at the same time, and in Riftbound, if that happens, you're allowed to decide the order in which the triggers go on the stack first. Again, if it goes on the stack first, it resolves last. So basically, you're allowed to choose which thing resolves first by placing it last. So for example, right here, we have this battlefield Zon Wardens right here. It says, when you conquer here, discard 1, then draw 1. And then again, we have this card right here, Super Mega Death Rocket. It says, when you conquer, you may discard 1 to return this from your trash to hand. For example, we have this game state right here where we have a Cemetery Attendant from base that moved into the Zon Wardens battlefield right here, and you conquer here. So let's take a look at this. Pretend you have no cards in your hand and you want to get SMDR Super Mega Death Rocket back into your hand from the trash. So if we choose to resolve Super Mega Death Rocket first, because we have no cards in our hand, we cannot discard anything, and hence we cannot return Super Mega Death Rocket back to hand. And then the Zon will trigger, and since we can't discard anything, we'll just draw 1 instead. If we decide to resolve Zon first, then because we have no cards in hand, we don't have anything to discard, so we'll draw 1, and then we'll have 1 card in our hand now, and then now we can trigger Super Mega Death Rocket, and because we have 1 card in our hand, we can discard that drawn card, and we can return the Super Mega Death Rocket back to hand. So sometimes it matters the order in which you place things. Let's take a look at another example right here. So we have Cythria of the Cloud Field right here. It says, when you play another unit, buff me. And we have Wild Claw Shaman right here. It says, when you play me, you may spend a buff from another unit to buff me and ready me. So in this scenario right here, Cythria, let's pretend Cythria is already buffed, and you are playing Wild Claw Shaman from your hands, so Wild Claw Shaman will not be buffed. So if we choose to resolve Cythria first, then when we play Wild Claw Shaman, she supposedly normally will get a buff. However, since she already has a buff on her, she will not get another buff. And then afterwards, Shaman will resolve. He'll steal the buff from Cythria, and they'll get a buff themselves, and Shaman will ready. And in this end state right here, we'll have a Cythria without a buff and a readied Wild Claw Shaman with a buff. How about if we resolve Shaman first? So if we play Shaman, though both when you play will get triggered, and we decide to add the Wild Claw last, so it resolves first. So what will happen is first, Shaman will steal Cythria's buff, and Wild Claw Shaman will get the buff and ready itself. And then, because Cythria triggered last, she'll be able to gain a buff back from Shaman being played, because she lost her buff from Shaman already, and she'll be able to get a buff. And in this state right here, we'll be getting a Cythria that is buffed, in addition to a Wild Claw Shaman that has readied and also has a buff. So between the two cases right here, Cythria will not receive a buff at the end state, she'll be unbuffed, but right here, Cythria will be buffed in the end state right here. So sometimes it really does matter the order you play stuff, so you need to be somewhat careful when you encounter situations like this. So hopefully throughout this long video, you picked up some new tips and tricks, as well as probably learned something. So in order to test your knowledge, let's do a little quick quiz. This quiz will not encompass everything that went over in this video so far, but hopefully it'll give you a better understanding and insight to what is there to become. So right here, we have this board state. The enemy has control of this battlefield right here with a Stormclaw Ursine and a Kog'Maw. Stormclaw says, when you play me, channel 1 rune exhausted, also has tank. Kog'Maw has Deathknell, deal 4 to all units at my battlefield. Right here on the other battlefield, we have a Fiora here, and on the battlefield back alley bar, and we control it. So a question now is, if I have Arena Bar at my base, can I buff Fiora with the Arena Bar gear in my base by exhausting the Arena Bar? So I'll wait a bit. 3, 2, 1. So the answer will be no in this case, and the reason why is Arena Bar specifically specifies that it needs to buff and exhaust a friendly unit. Although Fiora is a friendly unit, it is active right now, so it's not tapped sideways, and hence Arena Bar cannot be used on Fiora. If we do want to buff Fiora with Arena Bar, we need to find a way to exhaust her, and that's probably by moving her. Next question right here. Say my Fiora is given +2 might by a spell for this turn, so +2 might for this turn. Where can my Fiora move? What are the possibilities? I'll give you a moment. 3, 2, 1. So Fiora is able to naturally move back to base by exhausting herself, or because she gained +2 might, she'll become mighty right here, and when she is mighty, she'll have Deflect, Ganking, and Shield. So because of Ganking, she is able to move to the other battlefield as well. So say now, my Fiora decides to gank over to the other battlefield. What will happen? And can I now buff it with Arena Bar, since she's exhausted? 3, 2, 1. So the answer right here is no, we cannot buff it with Arena Bar. Although Fiora is exhausted in this state right now, because she moved to another battlefield occupied by other enemy units, it immediately starts a combat showdown, and during a combat showdown, you cannot play base speed things. Arena Bar, since it's not specified as an action or reaction, it is base speed, so we cannot use it in the middle of a combat showdown. Moving on to the next question. During this combat showdown, what can my Fiora kill and how is the combat damage assigned? Does Fiora also die as well? So I will give you a few seconds. 3, 2, 1. So the answer is Fiora can kill both the Stormclaw Ursine and Kog'Maw, and that is because she moved from back alley bar. So it says when a unit moves here, give it +1 might this turn. So there's another +1 right here. So it'd be 4 + 2 + 1. So that'd be 4, 6, 7 might total for my Fiora right here. The enemy unit only has 6 and 1. It'd be 7 against 7. So Fiora is able to trade with Stormclaw Ursine and Kog'Maw. As how the combat damage is assigned, it must be assigned to Stormclaw Ursine first because Stormclaw Ursine has the keyword tank. So Fiora will first assign 6 to Stormclaw and then 1 to Kog'Maw. Does Fiora perish as well? Fiora will perish as well because they both do damage back, and also when Kog'Maw dies, they'll also deal 4 damage to units at the battlefield right here, which includes friendly and non-friendly units right here. Moving on to the next question. Just reversing the scenario, if Stormclaw wasn't present, does Fiora still die? And does Kog'Maw's Deathknell require Deflect cost to target Fiora right here? Because Fiora is mighty, she gains Deflect if you recall. 3, 2, 1. So if Stormclaw wasn't present, Fiora will not die because the max damage Kog'Maw will deal to Fiora is 1 + 4 from the Deathknell, so that'd be 5. Fiora will survive it. And Kog'Maw does not require to pay for the Deflect cost because it doesn't choose specifically Fiora as its target for the Deathknell. It basically does it to everything, so there's no really chosen target by the opponent right here. If you were also wondering about Fiora's shield right here, shield does not apply to Fiora, if you recall, because Fiora is attacking in this case. So let's move on to another example. So right here we have an opposing Machine Evangel and controlling this battlefield right here. So my question is, can you react to an opposing Soaring Scout being played to an enemy controlled battlefield? 3, 2, 1. So no, you are unable to react to the Soaring Scout right here because you are not able to react to units being played. How about reacting to a Faithful Manufacturer right here? 3, 2, 1. So yes, you can react to this Faithful Manufacturer. You cannot react to it being played, but when Faithful Manufacturer is played, it'll trigger their ability when you play me, play a 1 might recruit unit token here, and hence when that ability is triggered, the when you play ability is triggered, then you can react to when the when you played ability triggers to do something to Faithful Manufacturer or just to play another reaction spell in general. Next question, if I react with Gust to the Manufacturer being played at this battlefield right here, do any recruit tokens spawn on the battlefield? 3, 2, 1. So the answer will be no, because when I Gust the opposing Faithful Manufacturer, the Faithful Manufacturer will go back to hand, and tokens cannot be played to your hand, because tokens cannot exist in your hand in general. So there will be no tokens generated at the battlefield. Another scenario right here. What if Soaring Scout was played onto the battlefield from base without Machine Evangel presence? Now what can you do? Can you react now? 3, 2, 1. Right here, yes, you can react now because Soaring Scout is attempting to conquer this battlefield right here, and when they're attempting to conquer it, you can play both action and reaction spells because this will be a non-combat showdown, so you're able to play action spells as well as reaction spells. So going back to the first little question right here, and reinforcing the point that you cannot react to a unit being played. So Shen right here is kind of a unique-ish unit. Shen itself is a reaction unit itself, so it can be played on your opponent's turn as a reaction to a battlefield you control or to your base. So if there's a chain existing and there's a fight going on in a battlefield and you decide to play Shen, the opponent cannot react to Shen being played. So once Shen is played, it gets added to the stack, it basically instantly resolves, and then afterwards the next item of the chain will begin resolving, and then you can potentially react to that instead. Let's go off with another quiz question right here with another scenario. So the scenario is I have a Wielder of Water controlling this battlefield right here. Wielder of Water says, while I'm attacking or defending alone, I have +2 might. I also have a hidden card placed next to Wielder of Water. Pretend this was hidden and my opponent can't see it, but we can see it. This is Hidden Blade. It says kill a unit on a battlefield. Its controller draws 2. So in this scenario right here, my opponent is attempting to cast an action spell that on their turn does 3 damage to a unit anywhere, and it is targeting my Wielder of Water. So in this case, does my Wielder of Water survive? 3, 2, 1. The answer is no, because 3 is greater than 2. Wielder of Water will die from the spell, and Wielder of Water will not get that +2 might because he is not attacking or defending alone, just sitting there idly instead. Next question. Can I react to the action spell, the 3 damage anywhere spell, by revealing my hidden card? 3, 2, 1. Yes, you are able to do that, because hidden cards can be played as a reaction rather, and it was played last turn, so it can be played this turn on the opponent's turn. Next question right here. What happens to my hidden card if I do not react with it and my Wielder of Water dies to the 3 damage spell right here? So 3, 2, 1. So basically the spell damage will occur, my Wielder of Water will be sent to trash, and since I no longer control this battlefield right here, my hidden card will immediately just cease to exist, kind of fizzle out, and will be just placed in the trash. Rewinding back, next scenario. So pretend that I have Azania's Hourglass at base. So Azania's is able to save a friendly unit, such as my Wielder of Water. So when Wielder of Water would die, Azania's Hourglass will die in its stead. Wielder of Water will be sent to its base exhausted. So, if I have Azania's Hourglass in base, it's active. If I still react with Hidden Blade, does my Wielder of Water survive? And do I draw any cards from Hidden Blade? So let's look at this scenario right here, try to follow along. So the 3 damage spell will go on targeting my Wielder of Water. I react with Hidden Blade, it goes on top of the stack. So it resolves first before the 3 damage spell. It says kill a unit at a battlefield. Of course, it has to target here because it is hidden, so it has an additional condition of here, so it can only target Wielder of Water. So Hidden Blade will kill Wielder of Water, but since we have Azania's Hourglass in base, instead of Wielder of Water dying, Azania's Hourglass will be sent to trash, and Wielder of Water will be recalled back to base. And as for whether or not I draw 2, I will draw 2 because the contingency to draw 2 is not based off something dying. It is just whoever Hidden Blade targets, its controller draws 2. Okay. Now, hopefully you're still following along, and if there is still a 3 damage to a unit anywhere still on the stack that has yet to resolve after Hidden Blade. So I will get a draw from Hidden Blade, my Wielder of Water will still be at base exhausted, Azania's Hourglass is no longer present. So now the 3 damage to a unit anywhere will hit my Wielder of Water, because it's still targeting my Wielder of Water, and although it moved from battlefield to base, I can still do 3 damage to it because it says anywhere. And hence, ultimately, my Wielder of Water will still perish and it will die at base rather than at the battlefield right here. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. So right here, we have kind of a similar example. We control this battlefield with Wielder of Water, and we have Azania's Hourglass that is hidden instead of a Hidden Blade placed last turn. So right now, the enemy is deciding to gust my Wielder of Water. Gust can target Wielder of Water because it is at 2 might. It's not defending or attacking. So what happens to my stuff when my Wielder of Water gets gusted? 3, 2, 1. So what happens is my Wielder of Water will return back to my hand, and if I don't react with my Azania's Hourglass, it will fizzle out and go to trash. However, if I react to the gust with Azania's Hourglass, I will first pop it on this battlefield right here, then the opponent's gust will resolve, sending the wielder of water back to my hand, and then, since I no longer control this battlefield, and there's a gear present right here, the gear is actually recalled back to my base, instead of fizzling out if I do decide to react. So another scenario right here, my friendly unit is dying from combat damage on another battlefield, so another combat is happening right somewhere here, and then I decide to react with Zanya's Hourglass right here. What will happen? So basically, nothing will happen because the Zanya's has an additional condition because it's revealed from hidden. Again, the condition is here, so we can only save stuff on this battlefield. And all that happens is my unit on that other battlefield will die, and now I've just revealed the Zanya's Hourglass that is placed on this battlefield alongside with Wielder of Water. So basically revealed some information to my opponent. Okay, lastly moving on, let's head in with the summary. So the main takeaways I want you guys to pull away from this video right here. In a 1v1 it takes 8 points to win, and the last point is harder to score. Generally, energy is generated by tapping runes, while power is generated by recycling runes, and power is usually color specific. A unit's might is equal to the amount of damage it deals and kind of its health it has. Played units come in exhausted, and you can play units to battlefields that you control through a process called reinforcement. Lastly, the attacker usually puts things on the chain first. An item last on a chain resolves first, so it's opposite on when the item is placed, and the spell reaction speed is reactions the fastest, followed by action, and then base speed right here. So probably at this point of the video, you're pretty excited you want to try Riftbound out. As of recording this video, Riftbound has not been officially released, hence we don't actually have a Riftbound TCG, but there are still other ways to test the waters out and see if you'll enjoy playing this game. To start your Riftbound journey, first you need to create a deck. And the deck archetypes are kind of illustrated by the color domains present from your legend as well as your legend ability. So I've been referring them to red, orange, blue, their colors, but they do actually have names. So red is Fury. So let's look at Fury. Fury is Conquer Focus. Focuses on a lot of aggression, raw damage, attack on your turn, and recklessness. Next we have Purple, which is Chaos. It has a lot of things interacting with trash, sifting through the top cards of your deck, discarding things, and also hiding cards. Orange is Body. Body has a lot of scaling, late game stuff, buffing units with buffs, winning raw fights, and re-readying units, so you can swing multiple times or swing on the first turn you played. Moving on, we have Yellow, which is Order. You spawn a lot of tokens, you have a lot of swarming, you have a lot of spells that just kill, and you have Deathknell, which triggers upon death of your units, and you have beneficial sacrifices as well, so you can trade a really small unit for potentially a really big unit the opponent controls. Blue, we have Mind, so it's a lot about planning ahead, manipulating your deck. There's a lot of gears and spells in blue, a lot of reactions as well, a lot of hidden cards, and blue can also draw a lot of cards. There's a lot of card draws, you can cycle through your deck pretty quickly as well. Green is Calm. It's more focused on holding battlefields, opposite of Fury, which is about conquering. So once you get a battlefield, you want to sit there and try to deny your opponent from taking it. There has a lot of spells as well, a lot of reactions. There's a bunch of negation as well, so it can negate other stuff, to negate spells, for example. And there's moving as well, so you can move your units around, enemy units around. There's cards focused with that. So now that you've gotten to know a bit more about the different domains, let's take a look at how to build a competitive 1v1 deck and what are the requirements. So for the requirements, there's an example right here. It's not actually a great deck, but just as an example to illustrate it. A competitive 1v1 deck requires a legend, so my legend right here is Misfortune. You need a champion unit or units that matches your legend. So right here, since I have a Misfortune legend, I need to play a Misfortune champion unit. So this one, or I can play this one, or I can play both of them. Both of these are Misfortune champion units right here. And I can also use other champion units, if you recall. So Kane itself is a champion, so I can still put him in the deck if it matches the color of my legend. Next, we need 40 cards total in our main deck. So all of these cards right here amass to 40, should amass to 40. We need 3 different battlefields right here that we can use. So 1, 2, 3. And we need 12 total runes that are in the same domain as your legend. So since Misfortune is orange and purple, we need a combination of orange and purple runes right here. And to make all these decks, as well as to browse other people's created decks, if you're not comfortable with making your own deck, you can head over to this community created website called Piltover Archive. Link will be in the description below. And it's a really useful resource generating decks. And those decks can be ported to Tabletop Simulator, which we'll go over later. Just a couple things to note is that when building a deck, you need to be aware of signature items, so signature spells, signature units, stuff like that. So signatures can only be used by these specified legend. So if it says signature spell, Misfortune, that means only a deck with a Misfortune legend can use this signature spell bullet time. Oftentimes the signatures are a bit better than their counterparts, but sometimes there might be exceptions as well. So besides signature spells, you've probably seen a couple of them through videos, there's also signature units. So if we have T-Bers right here, you can kind of guess which legend can only use this T-Bers right here. So it's Annie. Let's now look at ways in which we can play the game, just not physically because the physical thing has not released. So the one I recommend is the Tabletop Simulator mod. You do need to buy Tabletop Simulator, and it's accessible on Steam or other key sites, and it's around 10 USD on sale. You will need to subscribe to mods in the Steam page, but there are videos online that tell you how, explain to you how you do that. It's just clicking a button, is really simple. This Tabletop Simulator mod is made by Willow, and it is being updated regularly as of this date. So it is updated constantly. There is a big community Discord, link in the description below, and they're always looking to play. There's around 11,000 members as of July 2025. There are very few bugs in the Tabletop Simulator mod if you know how to use it properly. The only downside to it, I guess, is that you do need to learn how to use Tabletop Simulator. You do not need to know how to draw cards. You need to know how to shuffle cards, turn cards on their side. But it is really simple. It only takes like 5-10 minutes to learn. So this is the best one I recommend. So here's a screenshot of Tabletop Simulator right here, where there's a victor right here with their hand, and their stuff here, battlefields right here, playing against an opposing Jinx right here. Another way you can play is by printing proxies. So on the website, Piltover Archive, the one with deck building as well, there is an option that once you created your deck, you can export it to a PDF that is lined. So you can cut these out and put them into card backs, card sleeves, and just use these proxies to play physically. There is caveats to this, so it does cost money for ink and paper and printing costs, and you also need a printer. Ideally, you do want a color printer as well. You probably do want card sleeves instead of just playing with sheets of paper, and potentially extra card backs to glue these paper printouts onto the card so it's more rigid. Again, they're generated on Piltover Archive. You do need in real life friends or buddies to play together. Otherwise, you need a camera setup to stream cam games to one another. There is a cam matchmaking on the community Discord as well. However, it is much less active compared to the Tabletop Simulator one. Again, you do need time to actually cut all these out, glue them, put them into card sleeves, and it will take a while to make them. A good thing about proxies is you get a tangible feel of how Riftbound will play out physically. The next way you can do it is through Pixelborn. It is free. As of recording this video, do not recommend it right now. So Pixelborn is a sim, so kind of, if you played Legend of Runeterra, basically the system guides you on how each turn will be played, what you can do, what you can't do. Basically, the system helps you out. However, Pixelborn does require download with every update, and you do need to import the card images yourself. There are videos online how to do that. Pixelborn, besides the simulated gameplay, it also has cam gameplay, so you can play face-to-face like cam with proxies if you have them. Matchmaking is, I would say, a bit slower on Pixelborn, and the skill level varies a lot in Pixelborn. You do need to get used to using the sim. You need to know how to press the buttons and things. Hopefully I think there should be videos on how to play on Pixelborn. But the main reason why Pixelborn is not recommended as of right now is that it has a bunch of slower updates, and a lot of the card interactions are actually bugged. So there might be some weird things happening in Pixelborn. But I do see this in the far future being a really good asset once all the bugs are patched out and once the full set has completely been put onto Pixelborn. Okay, lastly, thank you all for watching this video. Hopefully you found this helpful and enjoyable, so I didn't waste so much of my time making this. And again, we have a disclaimer that some things might change upon the actual launch of the game. I'll try to keep this updated in the comments below or something like that. And hopefully, Riot, if you notice me, maybe invite me for some interesting things to do related to Riftbound later. I'm also aware that I am not perfect, so I will also list the core rules, whichever the most updated version is, down below. And you can take a big look at the 60 plus page document if you're still a bit confused. I did skimp over some stuff. And if you find anything amiss, feel free to correct me. I am welcome to feedback. I'm not a perfect person, and I'll try to update the mistakes that I've made. Lastly, again, if you found this video helpful, maybe trying to like this video would be great, and maybe it'll give me some motivation. Maybe I'll create some videos on 2v2 or an introduction to all the different legends released in set 1. So if you have any ideas, maybe I can do that in the future as well. Lastly, a big thank you again. Here is my credit slide. Bye-bye.